Chapter 52:20. Chirp, chirp, chirp. Gomang looked as if his scheme had succeeded. His wings immediately swept over with a strong gust of wind. Even a perfected foundation establishment expert would not be able to withstand the might of his wings, much less an early-stage foundation establishment cultivator. Ziyu was completely stunned, her mind blank as she watched the wings get closer and closer. A weird thought popped up in her head. Is this the feeling of death? What are you talking about? Lingshan's voice sounded in her head as she jumped out of the formation and stood in front of her without hesitation. How old are you? You want to die already? It's too early. Shintian appeared in front of her as well. Yeah. Yu Bing was the same. At this point, the only ones who could react in time were the three of them, who were at the peak of the early stage of foundation establishment. All of you. Ziyu felt her nose go sour. She knew very well that this was all her fault, and even if she died it was her own fault. But now Lingshan and the other two were standing behind her without hesitation. There was only one result to this, trading a life for a life, 3 lives for 1 life for hers. Without the formation, Lingshan and the other two wouldn't be able to survive Gomang's attacks even if they worked together. At the end of the day they were only foundation establishment practitioners. Gomang saw this and changed his target from Ziyu to Lingshan and the other two. Everyone here was his prey, it was just changing the way he ate them. However, at this moment, an extremely powerful bone-chilling cold erupted from behind him, accompanied by a cold voice. Ice prison mirror, shatter. 1.5 months after the competition she didn't do anything else. Even if she was already at foundation perfection, even if she had the supreme golden core Lin Yi gave her, she didn't have the slightest intention of forcefully breaking through to the golden core stage. After all, she had just become a legend in the competition. Breaking through to the golden core stage would only deplete her reserves. Even if she succeeded, she'd just fade into the crowd. Lung Lung naturally wouldn't do something stupid like that, and so she only did one thing, that was to train her trump card, prison drawing. Of course, she also had an even stronger skill, ice prison mirror break. The ice prison mirror shattered. Even Duan Muyu, who had unleashed his full strength back then, could not withstand it. Naturally, it was the same for the Gomang in front of him. He collapsed on the spot, becoming a human-faced, bird-bodied ice sculpture. Lingshan and the others looked at each other, their eyes filled with fear and relief. If Lung Lung didn't do it in time, they'd all become Gomang's food. On the other side, Lin Yi was facing Gomang alone. Unexpectedly, he wasn't able to kill it instantly. This Gomang was very cunning. It basically never attacked with its full strength. It would always move around to restrain Lin Yi, and its speed was extremely fast. Lin Yi couldn't finish it off with the 5 elements murderous aura. Otherwise, he wouldn't have let Cold and the others fall into such a dangerous and bitter battle. This guy is a little troublesome. Lin Yi couldn't help but frown. Although this Gomang's strength wasn't at the level of Golden Core, it was definitely above most of the Foundation Establishment Perfection Masters. Of course, it wouldn't be a big deal if that was all. Lin Yi could handle it, but because he was worried about the third Gomang that hadn't appeared, he didn't dare to stray too far away from the others. Otherwise, he'd be in big trouble if he fell into the trap of luring the tiger away from the mountain. However, this would put him in a bind. The cunning Gomang only used all sorts of long-range attacks, but never a direct confrontation. Lin Yi couldn't even attack it, let alone kill it. When the 5 elemental killing aura was useless, Lin Yi's only move was electric arc. It wasn't hard to hit the Gomang with the speed of the electric arc, but the problem was that the opponent wasn't the Fire Bat King, but the Gomang that surpassed Foundation Establishment perfection. The power of the electric arc could only tickle it, but it would be naive to think that it could kill it. Poof! That Gomang shot a green poisonous gas from afar. It didn't even bother to see if it was effective. After it was done, it turned around and retreated without any hesitation. What the hell? Lin Yi was helpless. Other than sending an electric arc to slightly numb it, there was nothing else he could do. Unless he unleashed his extreme butterfly microsteps to catch up to it. As long as he could close the distance between them to within 3 steps, the Gomang could forget about avoiding his 5 elemental killing aura. Unfortunately, he dared not take the risk because he knew that the third Gomang was waiting for an opportunity to strike. If Lung Lung was in perfect condition, it would be fine. As long as she could hold on for a bit, Lin Yi would be able to play along even if he knew that the Gomang was trying to lure him away. He had enough confidence that he could get back before anything happened to them, but Lung Lung had used up a lot of energy from using the ice prison mirror. She didn't even have the ability to protect herself. Lingshan and the others helped Lung Lung sit down to recover as they looked at each other. They could see the predicament Lin Yi was in, but there was nothing they could do. After all, they didn't even have the strength to act tough. Otherwise they'd end up like Ziyu and drag everyone else into danger. These Gomang are all crazy. Shouldn't they know when to retreat after suffering a loss? What's the point of them sticking to us like this? Qintian said helplessly. That's true, he looks like he's very smart. Why would a smart person do something like that? Yu Bing and the others were confused as well. Lingshan thought about it and spoke up. They're trying so hard to keep us here, don't tell me they have reinforcements? Even Lin Yi couldn't help but feel his heart skip a beat. He'd been keeping an eye on the third Gomang all this time and was only thinking of luring the tiger away from the mountain. He hadn't thought of this possibility. From the way the three Gomang moved in unison, it was obvious that they were existences that moved in groups. In that case, it was very likely that there was a fourth or fifth Gomang or even more. Chapter 52:21. Lingshan and the others nodded in unison, maintaining their defensive formation as they moved forward. Compared to staying in one spot, this was still a little risky, but compared to the possibility of them sitting on the ground and waiting for death, this risk was worth it. As soon as they started moving, the Gomang that had been clinging to Lin Yi all this while suddenly became a lot more intense. While it was still very careful to avoid a direct confrontation, it was clearly putting in more effort in its attacks, as if trying to stop the group from moving forward. Interesting. Lin Yi narrowed his eyes at the strange reaction. Boss, what did you find? Qintian asked. If I'm not wrong, this reaction proves two things, Lin Yi said thoughtfully. What two things? The others were confused. First, there's a high chance that they have reinforcements of the same species. Otherwise, there's no reason for them to keep bothering us. If they're the only two left, they should know that they can't do anything to us. Continuing wouldn't do them any good, and they might even get themselves killed, Lin Yi analyzed. This analysis was based on the premise that the Gomang had to have enough intelligence, or it wouldn't be possible if they were just driven by their animal instincts. Of course, from what they'd seen, the latter was very unlikely. Yes, it's very possible, the others nodded in agreement. Second, we need to be even more careful from now on. We might run into even greater danger ahead, something even more ferocious than these Gomangs, Lin Yi said solemnly. What do you mean? The others didn't understand. Think about it, if there aren't any other powerful beings ahead, do you think we'd be able to shake off the Gomang with our speed? Lin Yi asked. Impossible. The others shook their heads. They were walking on the ground after all, and their speed wasn't fast at all. Gomang, on the other hand, was flying in the air. It was a piece of cake for it to keep an eye on them. If that's the case, why would they be so nervous? They could have gotten a Gomang to follow us unhurriedly and wait for their reinforcements to arrive before attacking. There's only one reason why it's trying so hard to hinder our advance. Once we advance a certain distance, we'll no longer be under their control, Lin Yi said indifferently. That means that if we go any further, we won't be in their territory anymore, but in the territory of another existence. Qintian realized. Yes, and that existence must be extremely strong, at least on par with these Gomang, maybe even stronger. Yu Bing nodded. Ugh. Lingshan couldn't help but smile bitterly. Doesn't that mean we've gone out of the wolf's den into the tiger's den? That is true. Trials are always like this. There are dangers everywhere. Everyone will slowly get used to it, comforted Lin Yi with a smile. But big brother Lin Yi, aren't you nervous at all? If it's something even stronger than these Gomang, wouldn't it be more dangerous for us to keep going? Ziyu couldn't help but ask. In theory, yes. Lin Yi nodded, but we have to go forward if we want to go to the River of Consciousness. No matter how dangerous it is, we have to muster up our courage and go through it. We can't just give up halfway and become deserters, can we? I don't want to be a deserter. Ziyu shook her head, and the others had the same attitude. Since they'd decided to participate in this trial, they'd already prepared themselves to die. If they couldn't even handle this, how were they supposed to be able to hold their own in the future? How were they supposed to be Lin Yi's true helpers? Alright, let's continue then. Lin Yi nodded, pleased. He wouldn't force anyone, and it wasn't a big deal if someone wanted to back out now. It was human nature, and he wouldn't hesitate to send them back to the teleportation formation with the others before setting off again. The group continued forward, and Gomang's attacks became more and more intense, but it didn't stop them at all. After all, it didn't dare to attack them head-on, or Lin Yi's killing intent would be enough to send it on its way. After a while, Lin Yi's eyelid twitched. I sensed the location of the third Gomang. From the beginning, he had only been able to sense two Gomangs within the range of his perception. He was unable to lock onto the third one's location. Although he couldn't eliminate the possibility of it using some special means to hide, he could now confirm that it was chasing from behind. Furthermore, there was another big guy behind it. Where is it? The group asked. Right behind us, and it brought an even stronger one. It doesn't look friendly. Linny frowned. Before he could do anything else, the Gomang that had been harassing them from the start suddenly charged at them. It was coming at them fiercely, finally coming at them head-on. A cloud of green gas came at them from a tricky angle this time, and it was much closer than before. If Linny dodged to the side like before, the people behind him would be caught in the crossfire, but if he didn't, who knew what would happen to him if he got in contact with it? It wouldn't be a good ending, that's for sure. Careful, Linny bro. Ziyu and the others warned. But Linny wasn't panicking at all. Instead, he had a long-awaited smile on his face. With his strength, no one below the golden core stage could pose a real threat to him. If that Gomang kept harassing them like this, he really wouldn't be able to do anything. But now that it was coming at him head-on, how many lives did it have? Accompanied by a deep dragon roar, the 5 elemental killing aura immediately attacked. In the blink of an eye, it met the terrifying green poisonous gas head-on. In the end, the green poisonous gas collapsed upon contact, unable to withstand a single blow. Then the Gomang was taken care of as well. The human-faced head was penetrated by the 5 elemental killing aura, leaving a huge bloody hole as it collapsed to the ground. In front of the killing intent of the 5 elements, the green poison gas was just child's play. Dodging it carefully would save one's life, but fighting it head-on was suicide. Chapter 52-22. And this was just Lung Lung. If it was any other normal Foundation establishment perfection master, they wouldn't even be able to compare at all. They weren't on the same level at all. However, before everyone could finish cheering, an extremely strong gust of wind suddenly blew past above their heads. Fortunately, they were surrounded by an extremely dense primeval forest. If it was an open and spacious place like a plain, everyone would definitely be blown away. Even so, everyone had to rely on each other to barely stabilize themselves, and it was difficult for them to move forward. What a big Gomang. Ziyu looked up at the huge silhouette in the sky. The others looked over and their jaws dropped as well. At this moment there were 2 figures, one large and one small, hovering in midair. The smaller one was the 3rd Gomang that had disappeared for a long time. In fact, it wasn't considered small given its size. After all, it was more than 3 meters tall when standing upright, but compared to the Gomang beside it, it was a complete dwarf. Whether it was wingspan or body length, this Gomang was at least 5 times its size. Linny had seen quite a few spirit beasts of this size on Sky-class Island, but there weren't many that had this much pressure. Of course, this was also because Linny was too weak right now. If it were his main body here, there wouldn't be any pressure at all. Even if the Gomang was 10 times bigger, it'd still be a toy to him. Be careful, everyone. This guy's at least a golden core stage. Be prepared. Linny said in a low voice. He couldn't tell how strong the opponent was before he made his move, but he was sure that the opponent was in the golden core stage, and it wouldn't be as simple as the early stage or the peak of the early stage. If he didn't handle it well, it would be a fatal threat to everyone. The gigantic Gomang did not attack directly. Instead, it used its bestial eyes to look down at everyone and suddenly said, "Humans, surrender or die." Ling Shan and the others paused, looking at each other. This guy could actually speak human language? The 3 Gomangs were communicating with each other in a very human-like manner, but their words weren't human. They didn't expect this guy to be able to speak human language too, and with perfect articulation. Linny didn't find it strange at all. Spirit beasts could even turn into humans once they reached a certain level, and speaking human language was a piece of cake. This guy had a human face too, so it wasn't strange for him to have human vocal cords. As long as it wanted to, it could learn human language. "What are you?" Linny asked calmly as he sized it up. "I am the ancient Gomang king." The giant Gomang replied. "Bullshit." Although Gomang's main characteristic is a bird's body and a human face, the Gomang mentioned in the ancient texts were all existences that stood on 2 scarlet snakes. Besides, if you're really the Gomang king from the primordial era, how could you only have this little bit of strength? You don't even have the face to show your face when you don't have a mountain opening period? Do you really think I've never been educated? King Gomang was left at a loss for words. His massive face clearly blushed as though he was a fraud who had been exposed on the spot. It was as awkward as one could get. Ling Shan and the others looked at Linny with respect. They'd been nervous to see such a big guy coming at them so fiercely, but Linny was able to make him choke with just 2 sentences. He was practically the reincarnation of Zhuge Wuho. "This place is sealed off and the chi is lacking. Our Gomang clan is getting weaker with each generation. It's nothing strange that we can't compare to the ancient era. King Gomang was left speechless for a long time before he reacted. He said angrily, "To think that a mere human dares to speak such arrogant words to humiliate me. I'll let you die a tragic death." Lin Yi didn't panic at all, curling his lips nonchalantly. "I'm just speaking the truth, what's there to insult? You're the one who's weaker than the previous generation, can't I question you?" They'd thought that a fight would break out at this point, since they'd all seen how savage Gomang was. He'd even eaten the 3 little ones on sight, let alone this big guy that was at least at the golden core stage. However, the primordial King Gomang didn't attack him directly. Instead, he was surprisingly amicable. He said, "Fine, on account of your reverence for my Gomang race, I can spare your lives as long as you surrender obediently and don't resist." Ling Shan and the others were speechless. None of what Lin Yi had said had been about the Gomang clan. Had they missed it, or was this ancient Gomang king overthinking things? Surrender obediently? Don't resist? Doesn't that mean we're dead? You Gomang treat us humans like food, we saw it all just now. Do you take us for fools? Lin Yi said with a faint smile. Did they really eat it? The ancient Gomang king asked. How can it be fake? Lin Yi curled his lips. Bastard! How dare you steal and eat the tributes? Primordial King Gomang was instantly enraged. He turned around and grabbed the Gomang beside him with his claw. Ignoring the Gomang's pleas for mercy, Gomang crushed it into a pile of mangled corpses that fell from midair. This scene caused everyone to feel a chill run down their spines, and they looked at each other in dismay. Isn't this fellow a bit too ferocious? He even killed his own kind just like that. That crushing strength truly caused one's heart to palpitate. Alright, now you can believe my sincerity. As long as you surrender obediently, I promise I won't harm a single hair on you. The ancient Gomang king turned around with a kind face. Only someone with a hole in their brain would believe such nonsense. Everyone scoffed, only to see Lin Yi smile faintly. If you want us to surrender obediently, you should at least let us know how we'll be treated after we surrender, right? If we become your food again, wouldn't we all die a wrongful death? In the name of the ancient Gomang king, I guarantee that you won't be in any danger after you surrender. You'll just have your freedom restricted to a certain extent, and you won't be able to move around freely. Compared to losing your life now, this price is worth it, right? The ancient Gomang king patiently guided them. Lin Yi smiled and suddenly asked, What's with the tribute? Chapter 52-23. Is that so? Then let's talk about it. Lin Yi said as he led the group forward, completely ignoring the massive primordial King Gomang in the sky. However, before they could take 2 steps, a sharp wind blade surged down from the sky and struck right in front of them. At the same time, it was accompanied by King Gomang's voice that was filled with killing intent. Mere humans, how dare you toy with me? Do you really want to die? The power of the wind blade gave everyone a fright. Even Lin Yi's heart skipped a beat. From the looks of it, this King Gomang was probably in existence on par with a golden core late stage at the very least. With his Yuan Shen at a mere foundation establishment level, he didn't even dare say he had much confidence against ordinary golden core masters, much less a creature on par with a golden core late stage. Not to mention that he had Ling Shan and the others by his side. Am I toying with you? Aren't you going to allow us to talk about it after making such a harsh request? Lin Yi asked calmly. Although the opponent's strength was beyond his expectations, he was certain of one thing through this exchange. If the opponent wanted to capture them alive, the primordial King Gomang wouldn't dare attack them unless absolutely necessary. Just like the powerful wind blade from before, it was at most a threat. Alright, I'll give you a chance to talk. But the prerequisite is that you don't take another step forward, or you'll die. King Gomang said sternly. Don't take another step forward? Lin Yi laughed when he heard that, saying meaningfully, that means if we take another step forward, we'll be out of your control. Am I right? Look. Gomang's face immediately showed a hint of panic. Lin Yi's words had clearly hit the nail on the head. Otherwise, he wouldn't have needed to emphasize that they couldn't take another step forward. That Gomang subordinate wouldn't have risked his life to launch a sneak attack on Lin Yi's group. There was only one reason. This was the border of their Gomang territory. Looks like I was right. Lin Yi said with a faint smile. He suddenly took a step forward, stepping right past the deep mark left behind by King Gomang's wind blade. How dare you? Primordial King Gomang turned anxious as he immediately attacked with all his might. But at that moment, a hair-raising hissing sound came from opposite him. A gigantic snake dozens of meters long shot into the sky. Its scales were a dazzling bright red, making it look like a gigantic fire snake. Hiss 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 hiss, this human sure is clever. To think that the mighty King Gomang would be fooled by a mere human. How delightful. The gigantic fire snake similarly spoke in the human tongue as it laughed heartily without any fear. Everyone was alarmed when they saw this. A single primordial King Gomang was already troublesome enough, and now, a gigantic fire snake that was clearly not to be trifled with had suddenly appeared. It was as though they had been surrounded by dumplings. Only Lin Yi's face didn't look surprised at all. It was as if he had expected this scene. Red-scaled serpent, are you trying to ruin my plans? Primordial King Gomang stared at the gigantic fire snake with an unfriendly expression. A terrifying dark green aura lingered around him, sending chills down one's spine. Hiss 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 hiss. Darn bird, are you out of your mind? There are so many tributes in my territory. Who's ruining whose plans? Red-scaled serpent's head suddenly grew a pair of ridiculously large scales. From afar, it looked like a gigantic scarlet ghastly face that left one's hair standing on end. Bullshit. They're all in my territory. Primordial King Gomang said angrily. If not for a darn bird like you coming out to obstruct me, they would have long been in my territory. Besides, isn't there already a tribute walking over by itself? Before red-scaled serpent's voice faded, its tail, which had been hidden somewhere, suddenly swept out from the dense forest, heading straight for Lin Yi. Everyone was shocked. This red-scaled serpent was clearly in a standoff with Primordial King Gomang, but it had already locked onto Lin Yi. These fellows were truly craftier than the last. The red-scaled serpent's tail was extremely fast, but Lin Yi was even faster. This time he didn't hold back because of Ling Shan and the others. With extreme butterfly steps, he turned into a blur, and the snake's tail missed without a doubt. Hiss hiss, this human speed isn't to be underestimated. What an impressive tribute. Red-scaled serpent's expressionless face showed an unprecedented look of shock. It had been guarding this place for countless years, and no one had ever been able to dodge its attacks so easily. It seems like you all care a lot about the tribute. Can you explain to me what tribute it is? Lin Yi had already teleported back to his original spot. If one wasn't strong enough, they would think that he had never left at all. The primordial King Gomang's explanation of the tribute was obviously bullshit. If it was really a tribute, red-scaled serpent wouldn't have said that Lin Yi and the others were tributes. The two were clearly on equal footing, and the red-scaled serpent would never give any tribute to the primordial King Gomang. Moreover, from their tone, it was clear that they were fighting for the tribute. Hiss hiss, so this darn bird didn't explain it to you? Red-scaled serpent was a little surprised as it hissed. Darn bird, that's where you're wrong. Since you want to capture them as tribute, you can't possibly keep them in the dark, right? Otherwise, why would they be willing to work with you? You darn birds have such ugly faces for nothing. It's a pity that you've never had a brain since ancient times. Don't have a brain? Red-scaled serpent, do you believe I won't skin you alive today to restore the glory of the primordial Gomang race? Primordial King Gomang bellowed angrily. I say you don't have a brain, but you really don't. What kind of bullshit glory have you darn birds ever had? Besides, even if we did have a tiny bit of glory, it's only because our red-scaled serpent race was hoodwinked by you in primordial times and foolishly worked for you for a period of time. What else is there to mention? Red-scaled serpent hissed disdainfully. Hoodwinked? Our primordial Gomang race's coming-of-age ceremony has always been to capture two red-scaled serpents as close companions. All of this is based on true strength. If not for that, Lord, your red-scaled serpent race would only be our vassal. You wouldn't have the right to stand here and talk to me. Primordial King Gomang said condescendingly. Chapter 52-24. Come if you have the guts. Gomang laughed coldly. The two big fellows were at each other's throats, and the people below watched with their mouths agape. They had been on tenterhooks until just now. Be it Gomang King or the red-scaled snake, either one of them was enough to wipe them out, especially if they were to attack together. No matter how strong Lin Yi was, he wouldn't be able to protect them. Who would have thought that the two would start fighting each other first? Haha, looks like the ancient Gomang and red-scaled snakes have a deep relationship. This matches up with the ancient legends. Lin Yi couldn't help but smile, but he was more concerned about the great Sir Gomang King had mentioned. It was obvious that the great Sir's existence suppressed the hatred between the two races. From this, it could be deduced that the tribute they were talking about was to satisfy the great Sir's request. A playful smile appeared on Lin Yi's lips. Interesting, very interesting. This place that only appeared once in 1,000 years really did have some hidden dragons and crouching tigers. Boss, what do we do now? Should we use this chance to slip away? Chintian didn't dare make a sound, afraid of alerting the two murderous fellows. He only mouthed. The others looked at Lin Yi as well, thinking the same thing. If the two really started fighting, they wouldn't just be spectators. They'd be caught up in the shockwaves, and they'd have to be quick if they wanted to slip away. We can't. Lin Yi shook his head faintly. Those two might look like they were about to fight, but in reality they had been paying attention to their every move. If there was even the slightest bit of movement, they'd be the first to attack. Then what do we do? Ling Shan and the others looked at each other. If they didn't think of a way to slip away, they couldn't just stay here and watch, could they? They'd really lose their lives if they weren't careful, and they wouldn't even have a chance to slip away after the outcome was decided. Don't be too nervous. Let's just wait and see. Lin Yi smiled. To Ling Shan and the others, this was indeed a scene that they couldn't even breathe, but to him it was just a show. At that moment, the primordial King Gomang and the gigantic scarlet-scaled snake were already at daggers drawn. Despite the fuse having been lit, the two suddenly stopped. Humph, on account of that, Lord, I'll let you off today. King Gomang snorted coldly. Hiss hiss, who is going to let who go? You damn bird, you really know how to talk big. The red-scaled serpent hissed in laughter. It then glanced at Lin Yi and the others below and said, how about this, we'll split the tributes evenly and mind our own business. It's clearly the territory of our primordial Gomang clan. Why should we split it equally? What wishful thinking. Primordial King Gomang curled his lips in disdain as he said in a tone of charity, how about this? I'll leave the tribute in your territory to you. Everyone will take care of their own territories, or don't blame me for not standing on ceremony. So there's no room for discussion? The red-scaled serpent was enraged. After witnessing Lin Yi's speed, it knew that capturing Lin Yi wasn't realistic at all. If it really did as he said, it wouldn't even get a single tribute and would face heavy punishment. Of course. King Gomang hadn't even finished his sentence when the red-scaled serpent swooped down towards Ling Shan and the others. He was both shocked and angry. How dare you break the Lord's rules? You're courting death. King Gomang didn't dare fall behind and swooped down as well. He couldn't miss out on the rare human tributes that were delivered to his doorstep. Even if he died, he wouldn't let that bastard red-scaled serpent have it. Ling Shan and the others were shocked, their faces filled with fear. Now, not only did they not get to watch the show, they'd become the target of everyone. Even if they had a few lives, it wouldn't be enough to kill them. These two were strong existences on par with a golden core late stage, and their defensive formation could at most deal with a foundation establishment level attack. It was completely useless in a situation like this, and even Lung Lung's ice prison mirror wouldn't have any effect. They could only wait for death. At this moment, Lin Yi suddenly said, you two really don't seem to care about me at all, do you? You're nothing in front of us. King Gomang couldn't help but scoff at that. Hiss, looks like you're not smart at all but a complete idiot. You're just a little faster. You're lucky to be able to escape this disaster. Do you really think you can fight against me and this dead bird? I'm very curious, what's in your head? Is it all shit? Red-scaled serpent mocked without the slightest scruple. Everyone, including Lin Yi, were tributes in their eyes. It was a fool's dream to escape their claws. Of course, it was precisely because they were tributes that they were so patient. After all, the tributes had to be alive, or the Lord wouldn't be satisfied even if they were delivered. If not for that, everyone present would have long become their food. You'll find out what's in my head soon enough, but before that, I want to ask you one last question. What is this master you're talking about? Lin Yi asked back calmly. You want to know? Red-scaled serpent stopped diving down and exchanged a teasing glance with King Gomang. King Gomang also stopped and sneered. Foolish human, as long as you follow me obediently, you will naturally be able to meet that Lord. I guarantee you that you won't be disappointed. Oh, forget it. I'm actually not that curious. I was just mentioning it in passing. Lin Yi shook his head. Hiss, you're not that stupid. Anyway, there are still a lot of tributes here. It doesn't matter if you're here or not. It doesn't matter even if you escape. The remaining tributes are enough for me to report. Red-scaled serpent appeared rather carefree. It didn't feel that it was embarrassing for Lin Yi to escape. To it, as long as it could obtain enough human tributes to fulfill its mission, everything else was negotiable. Then, are the two of you not going to compete? Even if all of us surrender, it's still a question of who has more, right? Lin Yi said with a teasing look. Chapter 52-25. I'll seal your mobility first. As for how to split the spoils, that's a matter for later. Kid, don't embarrass yourself with such a crude attempt at sowing discord, alright? The red-scaled serpent's tone was filled with disdain. Those that could reach their level were no fools. Furthermore, be it the primordial Gomang race or the red-scaled serpent race, they were races with extremely high intellect. They had always been the ones plotting against others. When had they ever been schemed against by others? Is that so? Then I've miscalculated. Lin Yi nodded honestly. Ling Shan and the others looked at each other. The situation before them should have been extremely dangerous. In theory, apart from Lin Yi, all of them were facing a tragic fate of being wiped out. Yet, listening to Lin Yi's conversation with the two fellows, they felt strangely at ease. It was as if everything was under Lin Yi's control. This thought gave them quite a fright. Lin Yi only had the strength of a foundation establishment perfection. He should have been helpless against the Gomang King and the snake. How was he still in control of the situation? Could it be that their absolute trust and worship for Lin Yi had made them think that they were deceiving themselves? Of course you've miscalculated. Be a good tribute. Before he could finish his sentence, King Gomang shot out 4 giant wind blades in a row, overlapping each other to form a well-shaped attack. It sealed off Lin Yi's space to dodge, and unless he wanted to take one of the giant wind blades head-on, all he could do was stay where he was. Even Ling Shan and the others who worshipped and trusted Lin Yi to the core, didn't dare think of taking on Gomang's wind blade head-on. After all, this wasn't Lin Yi's main body, just a pure soul of a foundation establishment level. That would really kill them. Lin Yi's choice was within everyone's expectations. Even when the 4 giant wind blades fell at the same time, he did not move an inch. And in the next moment, just when everyone thought that this was an opening for Lin Yi to escape, the red-scaled snake had already appeared above his head, its huge and ferocious head less than a meter away from Lin Yi. No one expected that primordial King Gomang and crimson-scaled snake would really choose to join forces. They did not even exchange greetings, yet they were able to cooperate so well. Were these two really racial enemies? Lin Yi frowned. Everything else was fine, but the crux was that extremely pungent stench was truly unbearable, and even if he was a soul core, he couldn't help but feel nauseous. Big brother, how many years has it been since you last brushed your teeth? Lin Yi was still in the mood to crack a joke. Hiss, you're still pretending to be calm at a time like this? You humans sure are hypocritical, but you won't have the chance to do so in the future. The red-scaled snake opened its jaws abruptly, as if it was going to swallow Lin Yi whole. Ling Shan and the others paled at the sight, but Lin Yi himself didn't have much of a reaction. Instead, he mumbled, "Aren't tributes supposed to be alive? Hiss, as long as you're in my stomach, you won't die for a while." The red-scaled snake laughed delightedly as it bit down. Is that so? That's a shame. I might be willing to try it some other time, but I'll pass today. So many people are waiting for me, so I'll send you on your way first. With that, Lin Yi did not retreat, but instead went up to meet it, his left hand shoving into the snake's mouth. Haha, weird things happen every year, especially this year. I can't believe I've met one that's coming to die. Gomang couldn't help but laugh at the scene. While he was letting the red-scaled snake take advantage of the situation, there were still so many tributes down there. Letting one go wouldn't be a big deal. But before he could finish laughing, the red-scaled snake's body suddenly expanded like a balloon. Gomang froze. What kind of move was this? He'd never seen the red-scaled snake use it before. Not long after, the long and narrow body of the red-scaled snake had impressively swelled up to the size of a huge balloon. Then, with a bang, it exploded into countless pieces on the spot. Blood rained down from the sky, and a foul stench assailed the nostrils. Gomang was dumbfounded, and so was Ling Shan and the others. The entire scene was dead silent. What's going on? Qin Tian and the others looked at each other. Even they couldn't react in time. Such a powerful red-scaled snake had been killed by Lin Yi in one move. Big bro, Lin Yi is so strong. Ziyu didn't think too much about it. No matter what Lin Yi did, she wouldn't be surprised at all. Otherwise, how could he be her big bro Lin Yi? No wonder he was purposely distancing himself from us. So that's why. Lung Lung looked at Lin Yi, her eyes sparkling. She didn't know that Lin Yi had such a terrifying killer move, and she didn't know that Lin Yi could kill an existence like the red-scaled snake in one hit. However, she could guess Lin Yi's intentions. If they were to get too close, even if he had a killer move in his hands, they wouldn't dare to use it carelessly. Otherwise they would be the first to die. Who the hell are you? The primordial Gomang King stuttered. The red serpent had always been an old rival of his, and they had fought at least 8 out of 10 times. It could be said that they knew each other very well, and their strengths had always been on par. He never expected the red serpent to die in Lin Yi's hands with a bang. Even now, he still didn't know what Lin Yi had done. I'm just a human's tribute. Lin Yi shrugged his shoulders nonchalantly, as if dealing with the red-scaled snake was nothing more than a trivial matter to him. The more Lin Yi acted in such a manner, the more unfathomable Gomang King felt. He subconsciously flew up, afraid that he would follow in the red-scaled snake's footsteps and die at the hands of this human for no apparent reason. Just who are you? Gomang King sized up Lin Yi again. It doesn't matter even if I tell you my name. Do you think you've heard of me in a place like this? Lin Yi couldn't help but be amused. He said casually, looking at how nervous you are, you probably don't want me as a tribute anymore, do you? Alright, you may leave. Gomang King agreed. Alright, if that's the case, let's go. Lin Yi waved to the group and left without another word. Chapter 52-26. Lin Yi looked up at him and smiled faintly. That's impossible. We came together, so we naturally have to leave together. If you're indignant, feel free to try stopping me. Primordial King Gomang was immediately frightened by Lin Yi's tone. He had always been high and mighty, and Lin Yi was nothing more than an ant in his eyes. But now, with this ruckus, he had become the weaker party. He was left dumbfounded by Lin Yi. How about it? Quickly tell me if you agree. We still need to continue on our journey. We don't have time to waste with you. Lin Yi's tone turned more brazen. Punk, this is the territory of our primordial Gomang clan. You want to be unreasonable with me? You're barking up the wrong tree. Primordial King Gomang snorted coldly. Is that so? From your tone, you should be much stronger than red-scaled snake. Why don't you try the attack it just received? I guarantee you that it'll be powerful. Lin Yi said with a faint smile. Punk, do you really think that you can scare me like that? Although the primordial King Gomang maintained an extremely vigilant stance, he couldn't help but show signs of cowering. However, it wasn't realistic for him to be scared off so easily. Ignoring the issue of his reputation, he would be in deep trouble if he didn't have any tributes to report to that lord. I didn't expect to scare you, but do you have the guts to come down and attack me? Lin Yi taunted without any scruples. Primordial King Gomang did not say a word as he sent out a gigantic wind blade. That was his answer. Lin Yi easily dodged it. At Primordial King Gomang's height, the wind blade was only a deterrent at best. It was impossible for it to really hit him. He immediately looked up with a grin. From the looks of it, you don't dare to come down and attack me. The primordial Gomang clan sounds impressive, but if a mighty primordial King Gomang like you acts in such a manner, it's obvious what sort of people they are. How dare you? Primordial King Gomang fell for the goading as he swooped down in exasperation. He only had one target, Lin Yi. Instead of being alarmed, Lin Yi was delighted. He wasn't afraid of King Gomang's wrath, but he was afraid that the fellow would cower and retreat. After all, it was a powerful existence comparable to the late-stage Golden Core realm. Once it targeted them, everyone, including himself, would not be able to live in peace. The only solution was to wipe it out like how he had dealt with Crimson-Scaled Snake. Only then would there be no future problems. Another thing that made Lin Yi feel fortunate was that this guy didn't seem to have any intentions of doing anything to Ling Shan and the others. Otherwise, no matter how many tricks he had up his sleeves, he wouldn't be able to protect them. In the blink of an eye, King Gomang's figure was less than 10 meters away from Lin Yi. The dark green miasma around him could almost scrape Lin Yi's face, leaving Ling Shan and the others trembling in fear. However, there was nothing they could do in this situation. Even Lung Lung, who was the strongest among them, could only watch from the sidelines. Forcing herself would only make things worse. Of course, Lin Yi had no intention of asking for their help. He was satisfied as long as he could put some distance between them and not implicate them. Go to hell, kid. King Gomang roared with killing intent. As long as the miasma entered their bodies, no human would be able to survive, including Lin Yi, who had no idea what tricks he had up his sleeves. Alright, this distance is about right. You can go too. Crimson-Scaled Snake is waiting for you. Lin Yi grinned as he tossed out the pure chi pillfire bomb that he had been preparing for a long time in his other hand. From the moment he was targeted by the three Gomangs and realized that there was something going on, he had been storing up chi pillfire bombs in secret, and not just one but one in each hand. If this were back on Sky-class Island, he might be much stronger than he was now, but he might not be able to do something like that. It was an extremely dangerous thing to do. The more he stored the bomb, the more unstable it became. Even Lin Yi himself would be in trouble if he made a mistake, not to mention two bombs affecting each other. However, in the 10 months since his soul had been projected into the mortal world, Lin Yi's consciousness had improved by leaps and bounds. His control of chi had become more precise, which was why he was able to do what he was doing now. It was fortunate that he had a chi pill fire bomb in each hand, one against the crimson-scaled snake and one against King Gomang. Otherwise Linny would really be at a loss. Less than 10 meters above the ground, the true chi core fire bomb exploded with a loud bang. Without the isolation of the red-scaled snake's belly, the power of the explosion this time was much more terrifying than the previous one. Almost everything within a radius of several li was razed to the ground in an instant. Even Ling Shan and the others weren't spared from the shockwave. It was fortunate that Linny had purposely put some distance between him and them, and that the pure chi pill fire bomb only exploded 10 meters from the ground. Otherwise they wouldn't just be in a sorry state, they'd be heavily injured. It's dead, right? Ling Shan didn't wait for the commotion to pass before she forced her head to look up. That's for sure. Boss is extraordinary. Even the crimson scale snake is dead. That Gomang King must be dead as well, Shintian snickered. The others nodded with a smile. Although it was still chaos above, everyone could see that the true chi pill fire bomb was just inches away from primordial King Gomang. It would be a miracle if he didn't die from the explosion. However, Lin Yi's expression wasn't as relaxed as the others. They were used to relying on their eyes and couldn't see what was going on above them. Lin Yi, however, was different. Nothing above them could escape his consciousness, and from what he could sense, the situation wasn't that optimistic. It's really troublesome this time? Lin Yi sighed helplessly. Before he finished, Ling Shan and the others gasped in shock as a figure shot out from the chaos. It was King Gomang. That was close, that was close. Luckily I have shadow escape or I really would have died from your sneak attack. You're really something human. Primordial King Gomang wore a look of joy. He was in a sorry state at that moment. His colorful feathers were in tatters. Instead of calling him the mighty primordial King Gomang, it was more accurate to call him a drenched chicken. You're not bad yourself. At least a little stronger than that stupid snake. Lin Yi said faintly, his expression unchanged. Chapter 52-27. After fighting against each other for so many years, suppressing the red-scaled snake had almost become a sore point for it. Now that it had finally achieved its goal, and even made it so that the red-scaled snake would never be able to rise again, this was naturally a matter worthy of celebration. Is it a lot? Lin Yi smiled as well. There was no hint of regret or pity on his face. Instead, it was as though everything was still under his control. Regardless of whether he managed to kill the primordial Gomang King or not, Gomang King could forget about escaping from his grasp. They were on completely different levels. Kid, stop pretending. You're still too young to be able to scare me. Primordial King Gomang sneered as he curled his lips. I admit that you do have some tricks up your sleeves. To think that a mere perfected Foundation establishment human would be able to grasp such a powerful move. There probably isn't another human like you in the world, right? It's a pity that I'm the primordial Gomang King. I won't be scared that easily. Such a terrifying move must take a lot out of me. Using it once is the limit and using it twice would be a miracle. As for the third time, In other words, he didn't believe that Lin Yi could use it a third time. Otherwise he would have long fled. He wouldn't have stayed here to waste his breath with Lin Yi. Your analysis makes sense. You're right. I'm helpless against you now. You win, Lin Yi said frankly. With that, Ling Shan and the others looked at each other. They didn't know how far Lin Yi could go, but they could guess that Lin Yi's chi pill fire bomb had great limitations. Using it twice was indeed the limit, but even so, there was no need for him to be so honest, was there? According to their understanding, Lin Yi should at least put on an act to scare the other party. That way he could at least think of a way to find an opportunity. Why did he just raise his hands and surrender? The one who was most shocked by Lin Yi's words wasn't the crowd, but the primordial Gomang King. He was certain that Lin Yi didn't have a third chi pill fire bomb. If Lin Yi had continued holding on, he wouldn't have been able to scare him at all. But now he felt a little guilty. He couldn't help but mutter, is this kid trying to trick me into going down again? Even I've surrendered. They don't even have the strength to fight back. What are you hesitating for? Hurry up and take our tributes away. Lin Yi urged from below. Gomang King immediately felt even more uncertain. He suspected that this was a psychological attack from Lin Yi to scare him away. Escaping from the shadows was a life-saving technique of the Gomang race, but it could only be used once in a short period of time. The chi pill fire bomb had already injured him quite badly. If he were to use it again, his chances of survival would be close to zero. However, with so many human tributes right under his nose, he wasn't willing to give up just like that. After all, that lord wasn't so easily fooled. For a moment, Gomang King was in a dilemma. Oi, what's the meaning of this? If you don't say anything, we're leaving, Lin Yi urged again. Seeing that the other was still hesitating, he immediately walked away and said disdainfully, "What, Gomang King? I think you're more like a cowardly rat king. You're so afraid of a mere Foundation establishment perfected human. There's really no one like you." "You're saying I'm afraid of you?" Gomang King finally reacted when he heard that. "Isn't that so?" Lin Yi looked at him askance. "You don't know what's good for you." Primordial King Gomang grunted as he swooped down at an unprecedented speed. Although he looked like a drenched rat, his aura was far more ferocious than when he was at his peak. This was a result of his bloodlust stirring from his injuries. At this moment he was far more dangerous than ever. "Boss, be careful." Ling Shan and the others were alarmed. Even they could tell that Gomang King was going all out this time. Unless Lin Yi had a third true chi pill fire bomb, it would be too much. Lin Yi of course didn't have a third pill fire bomb. Just now he had already reached his limit. Even if he could rely on the jade space to replenish his chi, and even if Gomang King's hesitation gave him a chance to condense another pill fire bomb, that amount of time was not enough. With his current strength, unless he compressed the pill fire bomb to the limit, it would be difficult for him to pose a threat to an existence like Gomang King. At most it would just be a tickle. And other than the pill fire bomb, it was impossible for him to rely on other means to deal with Gomang King with his current Yuan Shin physique. Especially when he was facing a berserk Gomang King, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that he had a slim chance of survival. However, Lin Yi didn't panic in the slightest. He didn't even raise his head to look at King Gomang. Instead, he deliberately lowered his head as the corners of his lips curled into a playful smile. However, it was this expression that made the ferocious primordial King Gomang come to an abrupt halt. When they were less than 10 meters apart, Gomang suddenly charged up again. Furthermore, he was even faster than Gomang had swooped down. He was afraid that a repeat of his previous mistake would result in him suffering another true chi core firebomb. Fuck. Lin Yi immediately cursed. He wore a conflicted expression as though he was about to suffer internal injuries. His hands were surging with powerful and dangerous chi, as though he could lose control and explode at any moment. However, he forcefully controlled it. This punk was indeed up to no good. Gomang King saw all of this clearly and could not help but feel a lingering fear. He was thankful that he had been cautious, or he would have followed in the footsteps of Crimson-Scaled Snake. This human was just too freaking dangerous. Unbeknownst to him, all of this was a show that Lin Yi had specially put on for him. Although the amount of time he had was insufficient to condense a powerful pill fire bomb, it wasn't difficult to produce a chi wave that looked extremely dangerous. It was impossible for Gomang King not to fall for such a meticulously designed psychological attack. Chapter 52-28. Lin Yi saw through the fellow's intentions at a glance. He immediately said, "Since you don't dare to come down, Scram, it's pointless even if you keep following us. Once we reach the territory of other spirit beasts, even if we become tributes, it'll be theirs. What's so good about you? Aren't you being too naive if you think you can coax me away just like that? Let me tell you, all of you are my tributes. None of you can escape." Primordial King Gomang replied loudly. "Is that so?" Lin Yi looked at him with a faint smile and suddenly said, "Speaking of which, do you really think I can't do a thing to you if you fly a little higher? Kid, I admit that you are very strong and can pose a sufficient threat to me. However, do you have wings? Can you fly? No matter how powerful that move of yours is, do you think it can injure me?" Primordial King Gomang scoffed. To be on the safe side, he was at least 50 meters above the ground. Ignoring the fact that Lin Yi's core chi firebomb could not injure him, even if he could fly that high, he would have sufficient time to dodge in advance. Lin Yi chuckled in response. Without another word, he suddenly vanished from the spot without any warning or trace. "He's really freaking fast." Primordial King Gomang could not help but grumble. He had already witnessed Lin Yi's movement techniques before. It was the first time he had seen such speed, and this time he was even faster than before. At the very least, he could vaguely grasp his position previously, but this time he didn't even know where he was going. It was so elusive that it was inconceivable. "Thank you for the compliment." Lin Yi's voice suddenly sounded behind him. Primordial King Gomang jumped in fright, but he immediately reacted. He sneered. "True chi voice transmissions. You sure have a lot of means, but what's the use? You're overthinking things. I'm right here, so why would there be a need for true chi voice transmissions?" Lin Yi stretched out his hand and patted it from behind. This was a real person, and it was not some Jin Chi sound transmission at all. This scared the soul out of Gomang King. For a moment, he forgot to flap his wings and plummeted to the ground like a dead bird. He couldn't figure out how Lin Yi had suddenly appeared behind him. This guy was just a Foundation establishment perfected human. He didn't have wings, nor could he fly. How did he suddenly appear so high up in the sky? What was even more horrifying was that while it was falling vertically, Lin Yi was following closely behind it. He was also falling vertically, and there was clearly a powerful and violent fluctuation of true qi behind him. King Gomang was scared out of his wits. Without waiting for Lin Yi to make a further move, he no longer cared about his reputation. With a strange cry, he fled in a panic, vanishing in the blink of an eye. Oh. After landing calmly, Lin Yi heaved a sigh of relief. After racking his brains and using all sorts of methods, he had finally managed to trick this fellow away. "Boss, what's going on?" Wuxia Tian and the others quickly surrounded him and asked. "Nothing much. I just scared it away." Lin Yi smiled. Although he said it was easy, the situation just now had him breaking out in cold sweat. If he couldn't scare this King Gomang away and allowed him to follow them from the sky, their trip to the primordial trials would be over. This time, he had suddenly transformed into his Yuan spirit form and flew into the sky before suddenly condensing his Yuan spirit form. This move sounded simple, but it was actually extremely difficult. After all, the opponent was an existence comparable to a golden core late stage. It wasn't easy to hide from it. Besides, Lin Yi basically didn't have the ability to protect himself once he was in the air. He would be in danger if the primordial Gomang King were to fight back. This was truly a risky move. Fortunately, he had done a good job laying the groundwork. His opponent was already frightened by the mere twang of a bow, so he was able to successfully scare him away. Otherwise, it would be hard to say what the outcome would be. "Boss, you're awesome. You're really awesome." Only then did everyone realize that Lin Yi had been acting all along. First, he had used his strength to kill a giant red-scaled snake, and now he was using his acting to scare off King Gomang. Their boss was indeed skilled in both the pen and the sword. He was practically invincible. "Big bro Lin Yi, what do we do now?" Ziyu asked. The others all looked at Lin Yi as well. If the fire bats at the start were just a show of strength, then this red-scaled snake and King Gomang had made them truly understand the dangers of the primordial trials. It was a fine line between life and death. "Let's keep going." Lin Yi smiled. "Then, what if it follows us again?" Yu Bing asked. The archaic Gomang King wasn't an idiot, and even if he was scared off by Lin Yi this time, he'd come back to his senses very quickly. Even if he didn't come back to his senses right now, he'd wait until his wounds healed up, and it'd be troublesome if he was targeted again. Everyone looked at Lin Yi. His answer was only 8 words. "We'll deal with whatever comes our way." This answer wasn't exactly what they wanted, but it was the most honest answer Lin Yi could give. After all, this was the primordial trials. Anything could happen, and with his current strength, it was impossible for him to keep everyone safe. Dangers like today would happen again in the future, perhaps even 10 times, 100 times more dangerous than today. All he could do was adapt. Everyone fell silent. They finally felt a sense of danger they'd never felt before. If they didn't get stronger quickly, they'd become a burden to Lin Yi, and they'd even die in this godforsaken place. Looking at everyone's serious expressions, Lin Yi's lips curled up a little. This was the expression he wanted. The reason why he decided to let everyone participate in the primordial trials wasn't just because of anything else. The most important thing was to train them. After the scare, Lin Yi brought Lingshan and the others on their way. The other 2 paths, however, weren't as lucky. It wasn't just King Gomang and the red-scaled snake that had to loot human tributes. Other spirit beasts that had reached a certain level had the same task as well. This was the primordial trials that happened once in 1,000 years, and everyone was thinking about the river of consciousness and all sorts of miraculous encounters. They didn't think that what awaited them here was a complete massacre. Chapter 52-29. But the others who followed him were miserable. These people were far weaker than Ling Tianyu, and their reactions were not as sharp as his. Once they were targeted by the fox, they had no chance to escape at all. They could only surrender. Fortunately, the tribute was to be kept alive. Otherwise, all of them would have died here. There were more than 20 people in total, and in the end, all 20 of them became tributes to the fox. The others who managed to escape followed Ling Tianyu's idea and fled into the dense forest separately. After all, compared to the tributes of 20 people, the fox would not lose the big picture for the sake of a few people. What's more, the individual strength of these people was not outstanding. Escaping into the dense forest was like drinking poison to quench thirst. There were all kinds of hidden dangers in the dense forest than on the main road. Even Ling Tianyu couldn't guarantee that he could escape unscathed, let alone others. Compared with Ling Tianyu's miserable and embarrassing journey, Duanwuyu's journey was not much better. She had a lot fewer people on her side, but her strength was generally not weak. All of them were courageous and ambitious disciples of the Archaic Alliance. In the eyes of most people, although Duanwuyu was strong, she was far from being comparable to Lin Yi and the others. Even Ling Tianyu, who was at the peak of the late stage of Foundation establishment, could suppress her. Choosing to go with her meant that they had chosen the path with the lowest safety guarantee, but at the same time, it also meant that they had chosen the path with the most competitive value. Once they encountered any opportunities or treasures, everyone could fight for them. If it were the other two paths, especially the path of Lin Yi and the others, they wouldn't even think about it. Unless they avoided the main road and went into the dense forest alone, they wouldn't be able to get any benefits from Lin Yi and the others. But Duanwuyu's path was different. Not only could they fight for the treasures, but they also had a real chance to get them. It was worth mentioning that Fei Yangxing was also among these people. He could have gone with Lin Yi and the others. At least compared to the other disciples of the Archaic Alliance who had nothing to do with him, he had a better chance to get some benefits, but his ambition was obviously not limited to this. It was a pity that Fei Yangxing and the others didn't find any treasures. Instead, they found a one-eyed giant bear. Just like the other powerful spirit beasts that appeared, this was also a powerful existence comparable to a master of the gold core stage. For Duanwuyu and the others, it was a disaster. In the end, Duanwuyu was lucky enough to escape. Everyone else, including Fei Yangxing, were all turned into tributes. Heaven Lifting Wall was the only cliff in the entire primordial training ground. To other spirit beasts, it was a forbidden zone that they could not easily approach because it was the base camp of the primordial Gomang clan. The sky-reaching wall was filled with caves of varying sizes. Each cave had a Gomang residing in it, and there were hundreds of them in total. And the owner of the huge cave at the highest point was the primordial Gomang king. Your Majesty. When they saw primordial King Gomang fleeing in a pathetic state, all the Gomang were alarmed. Although King Gomang's strength wasn't so powerful that it was invincible, he had few opponents in the sky. Normally, he wouldn't have suffered so much even if he wasn't his match. What was going on today? Are you injured? An old Gomang hurriedly came forward. He was the oldest and wisest advisor here. At the same time, he was the most skilled physician. He immediately checked on King Gomang's injuries. I encountered some trouble. Gomang couldn't keep his face any longer. No matter what, being scared off by a human like Lin Yi wasn't something to be proud of. Could it be the work of the red-scaled snake? Old Gomang guessed. The red-scaled snake's territory was just next door, so it was common for them to fight each other. And with the red-scaled snake's strength, it was indeed enough to heavily injure King Gomang. However, it definitely wouldn't be any better off. It's already dead, King Gomang said vaguely. Really? It wasn't only old Gomang. Even the other Gomangs revealed looks of delight when they heard that. The red-scaled snake was their nemesis, so this was a joyous occasion. It's no wonder you were so heavily injured. You even had to use shadow stripping. Not a bad deal. Old Gomang nodded immediately before saying, then shouldn't we quickly send some Gomang to take over the red-scaled snake's territory? Otherwise we'll be giving it to someone else for free. The red-scaled snake was a solitary creature. With its death, the territory would naturally become vacant. It was a juicy piece of meat. I'll leave the arrangements to you, said King Gomang casually. Yes. Old Gomang answered happily. After a pause he said, by the way, Your Majesty, that Lord's envoy is here. He's waiting in your cave. I got it. King Gomang's heart sank. What he feared had really come. How was he to answer to Lin Yi after suffering such a huge setback at the hands of Lin Yi? Striding into the extremely spacious cave, one could see richly ornamented beams and painted rafters. It was a place of antiquity and opulence. It was rare to find such a place in the mortal world. If an outsider were to enter without any knowledge, they would definitely not think that this was King Gomang's cave abode. All of this was the work of King Gomang. Although the primordial Gomang race had a human face and bird body, be it their thoughts or customs, they spontaneously looked up to humans. They revered human culture from top to bottom, and any Gomang with a bit of status or hierarchy would have their cave abodes filled with primordial culture. King Gomang was the pinnacle among them. Of course, revering human culture was one thing, but it did not change the fact that humans were food in their eyes. Learning and eating were two different matters. In the past, King Gomang would be in a good mood every time he returned to his cave abode. But this time he was trembling as though he was treading on thin ice. If not for the fact that he knew he could not escape, he would have turned tail and fled. As he walked into the cave abode with an uneasy heart, King Gomang immediately saw a tiny figure on the table. It looked like a white and plump worm, but he did not dare lower his guard. Instead, his heart palpitated as he nearly knelt down on the spot. "Lord Envoy, I've been impolite for keeping you waiting." King Gomang held his breath as he bowed reverently. "Speak clearly. Were you impolite or did you fail?" The worm's voice was sharp and thin, giving off the feeling of a child. However, it had a baffling aura that left one's heart palpitating. Chapter 52:30. Tell me the details. The bug's tone was a little mysterious. Yes, there was an expert among the human tributes I encountered. He finished off Red-Scaled Snake with a single strike and then used the same move to heavily injure me. Thankfully, I had the life preservation skill of shadow stripping. Otherwise, I would have followed in Red-Scaled Snake's footsteps. Furthermore, that human seemed to be able to fly. In short, he was unfathomable, said King Gomang in a deep voice. Is that so? What's that human called? The bug asked casually. I think he's called Lin Yi, Gomang said quickly. Lin Yi didn't say who he was, but Ziyu and the others mentioned it a few times, so it wasn't strange for him to remember it. Lin Yi? The little white worm memorized this name and said with great interest, it's rare to see a human who can kill a red-scaled snake in one move, and he can even fly. If there are more of such tributes, I think Master will be very happy. Yes, no matter how strong that Lin Yi is, he won't be able to escape from the Master and the Envoy. Tributes are tributes, and his fate was decided the moment he stepped in here. Gomang smiled apologetically. Alright, let's talk about yourself. What are you going to do, letting so many human tributes slip through your fingers? The little white worm looked at it and said. It was clearly looking up, but it gave off a powerful sense of oppression, as if it was looking down at it from a higher position, causing one to tremble in fear. This. King Gomang immediately broke out into a cold sweat from his anxiety. He knew very well what the outcome would be if he failed to capture the human tributes. He didn't even dare imagine such a scenario. He hurriedly said, Envoy, don't worry. I'll definitely make up for my mistakes and deliver the human tributes in time. Make amends for your mistakes? Tell me, how are you going to make amends? The little white worm suddenly laughed and said non-committally, as far as I know, those human tributes have already left your territory. Now that they're in someone else's territory, they're their tributes. If you try to steal them, you'll be breaking the rules and will be heavily punished. If not for that, King Gomang and Crimson Scaled Snake would not have wasted their time. They could only act freely in their own territory. That was the most basic rule. Furthermore, it was set by that lord himself. No one dared to defy it. That. King Gomang was momentarily at a loss for what to do. In fact, he had already thought of this on the way back. Back then, he was thinking of sneaking to another territory to steal someone. With his advantage in the air, he could do it without anyone noticing. Who knew that the envoy was already waiting for him before he even returned to his lair? How about this? I'll give you a way out, the little white worm said calmly. Lord Envoy, please speak. I represent the entire Gomang clan in thanking you, said King Gomang hurriedly. Scatter all the Gomang of your tribe. No matter whose territory it is, have them search for any lone human tribute. If they find one, capture it alive. If they can't, send it to Master, ordered the little white worm. Yes, as you wish, Lord Envoy. King Gomang was delighted when he heard that. Although the mission wasn't difficult, in the entire primordial trial grounds, only their Gomang clan could accomplish it. This was because they were the only aerial faction of a certain scale. Of course, there's no need for you to go alone. A large target will easily invite unnecessary trouble, added the little white worm. Even if one or two ordinary Gomang went to the territory of other spirit beasts, nothing would happen. The other spirit beasts typically wouldn't think anything of them, but King Gomang was different. If he were to fly over someone else's territory, it would be no different from a declaration of war. Then what should I do? Asked King Gomang. You. The little white worm paused as it sized up King Gomang and said meaningfully, pass down the instructions first. Yes. King Gomang immediately did as he was told. With a command, all the Gomang of various sizes were mobilized. Only then did he return to report to the little white worm. Lord Envoy, feel free to instruct me if you have any other requests. I'll definitely not hesitate to climb a mountain of swords or plunge into a frying pan. The primordial King Gomang was still busy expressing his loyalty. Although the envoy looked unassuming, he was the representative of that lord. The authority he wielded was no trifling matter. Even a hegemon like him had no choice but to bow and scrape to him. "I'm hungry," said the little white worm. What? King Gomong was momentarily taken aback, thinking that he had misheard. "I've been asleep for centuries." "I'm hungry," repeated the little white worm. King Gomong finally understood. He could not help but click his tongue as he bit the bullet and asked, "Then what would you like to eat?" "I'll think of a way." The envoy looked fair and tender, so what he ate was definitely different from his Gomong clan. But since the envoy had made such a request, he had to find a way to satisfy it. However, the little white worm laughed as it stared intently at King Gomong. "There's no need to go through so much trouble. You can do it." "Ah." King Gomong was momentarily taken aback. Before he could react, the little white worm had already bounced up from the table and instantly stuck to his face like a cannonball. No matter how he struggled, he was unable to shake it off. "Be good and don't struggle. That way you'll feel less pain." The little white worm suffused a terrifying red glow. With the passage of time, the red glow became more and more blinding and demonic. It left one shuddering. Brain-eating worm. Only then did primordial King Gomong have a flash of inspiration. He finally recalled the special envoy's origins. This was the famous brain-eating worm. Before that lord appeared, the brain-eating bug was a nightmare for the entire primordial trial grounds. Wherever it went there would be a reign of terror. Countless powerful spirit beasts had died in its hands. It was only when it encountered that lord did it cease to exist. After that it became that lord's special envoy. King Gomong was well aware of this period of history. Logically speaking, he should not have been so careless. However, he had just been agitated by Lin Yi. Furthermore, the envoy had been asleep for centuries. His ferocious might from before had already subconsciously faded from his mind. Only now did he realize what had happened. Unfortunately, it was already too late. The brain-eating worm had already stabbed into his face. Before he could even struggle, a long, thin mouth had penetrated his skull and smashed into his brain. In a blink of an eye, his brain juice was sucked clean. King Gomong was reduced to a brainless corpse as he collapsed to the ground. Chapter 52:31. It's been a few hundred years since I've eaten. I've almost forgotten the taste of food. The brain-devouring worm shot a glance at King Gomong's corpse before slowly crawling out. When it reached the cave's entrance, it suddenly leaped up. Then in midair, after a freefall, the five-colored mark on its back suddenly lit up. Then with a surge it grew a pair of gigantic wings. In the forest, Lin Yi's group continued advancing. With Gomong King and the red-scaled snake as an example, Lin Yi was constantly condensing his chi so that he wouldn't be caught off guard when something unexpected happened. Of course, Lin Yi couldn't hold a chi bomb in his hand all the time. Even if he didn't have to worry about not having enough chi, it would still take a lot of stamina, and if he wasn't careful it would cause a huge mess. What he was doing now was raising the chi in his body to a level far higher than normal. This way he could shorten the time he needed to condense the bomb. This way he wouldn't use up too much stamina, and he wouldn't be at a loss when something unexpected happened. It was a win-win situation. Other than that, Lin Yi also expanded his consciousness to its maximum range. This way he would be able to sense the slightest movement and have enough time to react. With these 2 points, the group's safety was guaranteed to a certain extent. At least, they wouldn't have to face off against a golden core late-stage spirit beast. If it was just a normal spirit beast blocking the way, he wouldn't even need to do anything. He just had to watch from the side and Lung Lung and Ling Shan would be able to take care of them. This was a rare opportunity for them to train in real combat. After the group took down the third spirit beast, the sky darkened. Lin Yi called out to the group, "Let's rest here, it's too dangerous to travel at night. We'll continue in the morning." "All right." The group nodded. To tell the truth, these 3 spirit beasts weren't that strong, but to them who were only early stage it was troublesome. They needed some rest. "Boss, do we need to split into groups?" Yu Bing reminded. "There's no need for that. Your task is to rest well and adjust to your peak condition before daybreak. As for guarding, leave it to me." Lin Yi smiled. To him this was a trivial matter. Moreover, in this kind of environment, true vigilance required a powerful divine sense. Otherwise it would just be a facade, and this was something that everyone clearly did not meet. All right. No one objected to this. They needed a good rest or else they would be a burden to the others tomorrow. Lin Yi guided everyone to sit down and rest in a formation that they could quickly respond to. After all, this place was full of danger and they could not let their guard down at night. As for himself, he chose a big tree at the side. Not only did it have a wide field of vision, it was also convenient for him to sense. Looking up at the stars in the sky, listening to the strange cries coming from all directions, thinking back to what happened during the day, Linny didn't feel scared at all. Instead, he felt a little excited. He was a natural-born adventurer, and if this ancient trial wasn't full of crouching tigers and hidden dragons, he wouldn't be so excited. But it would be a lie to say that he wasn't worried at all. Even with the Pillfire bomb, Linny was at the peak of the foundational level. It wouldn't be easy for him to protect everyone. At most, he would be able to give it his all in case of an emergency, but to say that he could control the situation was just a pipe dream. But what is it that I'm missing? Linny sighed. He had never been sad about breaking through before, even when he reached the nascent soul stage and the profound ascension stage. However, this time he was stuck at the peak of the foundational level, and he really couldn't understand it at all. Not to mention the brain, he couldn't even touch the stone. How could he cross the river? But no matter what, Linny would still keep trying even in this situation. Anyway, when he was cultivating, his divine sense would not weaken, but it would become more sensitive, and it wouldn't delay the vigilance task. What Linny didn't know was that in the process of his continuous attempts, his body in the middle island of the heavenly stage suddenly had an abnormal reaction. Linny? Linny, you're awake? Tian-chan saw that Lin Yi's body suddenly exuded a strong aura, and suddenly she was shocked. Usually, in addition to alchemy, she would usually stay by Lin Yi's side. For so many months, Lin Yi hadn't returned, which really made her, Sydney and Wei Xinjin worried, but fortunately Lin Yi's aura had always been very stable, and he also replied through the Central Chamber of Commerce, which made them feel relieved. But now, this was the first time in so many months. Lin Yi's aura was obviously getting stronger rapidly, and there was no sign of it stopping. It was getting stronger and stronger, and in the blink of an eye, it had caught up with Lin Yi's previous peak state, far stronger than the average early-stage Profound Ascension Master. If it wasn't for the special formation reinforcement of these houses in the Middle Island Commercial District, the aura alone would be able to destroy the houses. What's wrong? Sydney noticed the strangeness in the room, and rushed up without caring about the business. When she saw Lin Yi's state, she was stunned and said with surprise and joy, "Is he coming back?" Maybe. Tian-chan was also not sure. She didn't know what the situation would be like when the primordial spirit projection returned, but at least one thing was certain, Lin Yi's state must be that something was going to happen. Then what should we do now? Sydney was a little panicked. She could only helplessly look at Lin Yi and then look at Tian-chan. Although she was usually in charge of the Tiandan Pavilion's matters, when Lin Yi was not around, Tian-chan was the real backbone. But at this time, Tian-chan also did not know what to do. She thought for a while and said, "Why don't you ask Brother Wei to invite Senior Brother Kai Zhongyang and Senior Brother Ho Guanqi to have a look? They have rich experience and are also medical experts. If there is any problem, they should be able to see it." "Okay, I'll go call him now." Sydney heard this and immediately went downstairs to ask Wei Xinjin to find them. Chapter 5232. To be honest, the person who could help the most at this time should be the acting island master Okuda. Even if he did not have the personal experience of soul projection, he could at least come forward and ask Southern Sky Aurora, and he could also consult the Island Master Pavilion's steward in this area. It was a pity that Okuda was a pure outsider after all, and he was also a very high-ranking person. Previously, he had been troubled twice by the matter of sending the letter. Tian-chan and the others were already a little uneasy. If they ran to him again when there was a slight problem, it would be too much. Even if the other party did not say it, they would also feel bad. Soon Wei Xinjin found Kai Zhongyang and Ho Guanqi. The two hurriedly walked into the room, and when they saw Lin Yi's state, they revealed a look of surprise at the same time and looked at each other. What did the two senior brothers see? Tian-chan asked quickly. He hasn't woken up yet, right? Kai Zhongyang and Ho Guanqi looked at each other and asked. No, what's wrong? Tian-chan and Sydney both shook their heads. So far, although Lin Yi's aura was strong to the extreme and even caused chaos downstairs, and had to temporarily close the shop, he really did not have any intention of waking up. Since he hasn't woken up, why is this situation happening to him? Kai Zhongyang looked inexplicable. This situation? Tian-chan and Sydney were stunned when they heard this. You have experienced this situation before, isn't it a sign before a breakthrough? Ho Guanqi explained. Breakthrough? Lin Yi is going to break through? The two women finally reacted. They were typical people who were closely involved in the situation, and because they were too worried, they forgot that this familiar scene was a unique sign before a breakthrough. It was just that Lin Yi was now at the early stage of mysterious ascension, and the movement of the breakthrough was far beyond their expectations. That seems to be the case, but there's one thing I don't understand. Since he hasn't woken up yet, how could he have broken through? Kai Zhongyang was puzzled. Breaking through was a very important matter for cultivators. No matter how talented they were, they would need to give it their all in order to have a chance of success. As for breaking through in one's sleep in an unconscious state, that was something that had never happened before in the world of cultivation. Was it even possible to wake up and discover that one had broken through? At least in Kai Zhongyang and Hou Guanqi's understanding, this was absolutely impossible. However, Lin Yi's current state was overturning their understanding bit by bit. Yeah, he can't be cultivating even when he's sleeping, right? Hou Guanqi also found it unbelievable. If he's just cultivating while he's sleeping, then it's easier for me to understand. After all, he's Lin Yi, not an ordinary person. It's not strange for him to do something that defies common sense. But now he's projecting his primordial spirit. It's obvious that his primordial spirit isn't here, so how can he control the circulation of his innate qi? Kai Zhongyang shook his head and smiled bitterly. When people were sleeping, their consciousness was still active. For cultivators, it was just that their primordial spirit was still in a normal state. It was just a kind of subconscious self-control. Although it was rare to cultivate under such circumstances, strictly speaking, it was not difficult to imagine. But Lin Yi's primordial spirit wasn't even here, and it was not just simple cultivation, but directly breaking through on the spot. What the hell was this? Just as everyone was talking, the aura on Lin Yi's body had impressively broken through its original limit. Everyone only felt a powerful invisible wave of qi from Lin Yi's body, and they all took a few steps back in unison. Only then did they stagger and stabilize their bodies. Then there was a moment of incredible silence. Watching as Lin Yi's aura stabilized little by little and gradually returned to the original undetectable state, Kai Zhongyang and Hou Guanqi were both stunned. After a long time they looked at each other and said a few words, the peak of the early stage of profound ascension. Just now it was just a bold guess, but now it had simply become a living reality. In this world, there was really someone who could break through in a state of unconscious or even without a primordial spirit, and it was at a high level like the profound ascension stage. It was really incredible. If they didn't see it with their own eyes, they would never believe it even if they were beaten to death. Tian Chan and the others were also stunned, but compared to the breakthrough, Tian Chan and Sydney were more concerned about Lin Yi's current state, for fear that something unexpected had happened to Lin Yi. Don't worry, his state is the same as before, there's no big problem. Hou Guanqi carefully examined Lin Yi's body, and did not find any abnormalities, all the signs were very stable. Oh, that's good. Tian Chan and the others were relieved. But what is going on with him? How did he break through? Kai Zhongyang was still frowning, puzzled. Come on, this is too bizarre for us, we can't figure it out by ourselves, we can only wait for him to wake up and ask. Hou Guanqi shook his head with a bitter smile. Tian Chan and Sydney looked at each other. In their opinion, it didn't matter what the breakthrough was, as long as there was no problem with Lin Yi's body. Waiting for Lin Yi's primordial spirit to return safely, this was their biggest wish. This time, the storm was more frightening than dangerous, and Tian Chan and the others were shocked. But Lin Yi, who was far away in the ancient trial ground, was unaware of it. What's going on? Lin Yi mumbled to himself. When he tried to break through just now, it was obviously different from before. There seemed to be a sign that he was about to break through, but this subtle feeling didn't last long, it disappeared without a trace, and then he fell into the original bottleneck. No matter how hard he tried, the barrier was still there, unmoving. If it was someone else in this situation, they would definitely be depressed for a while. Did they grab a life-saving straw, only to find out that it was really just a straw? Just thinking about it was depressing, but Lin Yi maintained his mentality, he didn't think too much about it. He looked down at the people who were quietly resting, and coincidentally met Lung Lung's gaze. The two couldn't help but smile at each other. The primeval trials this time was not a small test for everyone, and among them the one with the most pressure would be Lung Lung. She was the second strongest after Lin Yi, and every time they encountered a spirit beast she would be the main force. At the same time she had to take on the responsibility of protecting Lingshan and the others, and the pressure was not small at all. Chapter 52-33. One day's worth of hard work was equivalent to a month's worth of hard work. An opportunity like this wasn't something that one could simply come across. The two looked at each other, understanding each other without words. Lung Ling nodded slightly and went back to recuperating. She had expended quite a lot of energy in the day, and if everything went well, she would have to take on the main responsibility tomorrow. She couldn't afford to slack off. The night passed uneventfully. By the time the sun rose, everyone had basically recovered to their peak condition, and they continued their journey under Lin Yi's lead. The next 2 days, the group's experience could be said to be more daunting than dangerous. Although they did encounter various kinds of spirit beasts along the way, most of them were only at the foundation establishment stage. Lin Yi didn't even need to do anything as long as Lung Lung and Ling Shan could take care of them. To the group, it had become a true battle training journey. As for the spirit beasts that were as strong as Golden Core practitioners, Lin Yi could basically take care of them with a pure chi pill firebomb. At the very least, he could scare the opponent away. As long as there weren't more than 2 of them appearing at the same time like before, it wasn't a big problem. Of course, Golden Core spirit beasts usually had their own territory, and each territory could only have one master. Unless they happened to step on the dividing line, the probability of encountering such a situation was not high. However, on the 3rd night, Lin Yi's group welcomed an uninvited guest. Lung Lung and the others were recuperating as usual. Lin Yi, on the other hand, was guarding the tree trunk out of habit. Suddenly his expression changed. At the furthest end of his divine senses range, there was clearly a flying spirit beast approaching their direction at high speed. Gomong? Lin Yi paused. The silhouette of the flying spirit beast was extremely blurry, but judging from its wings, it was most likely the primordial Gomong that they had met before. Lin Yi's first thought was that the primordial King Gomong had chased up to him, but he quickly rejected that theory. This was because the other party wasn't that big in size. It was a far cry from primordial King Gomong's massive body. At best, it was an ordinary Gomong. There was nothing to be afraid of if it was just an ordinary Gomong. Ignoring Lin Yi, even Cold and company could deal with it calmly after the past few days of combat training. However, Lin Yi's expression was rather heavy. For some reason, Gomong gave him an inexplicable sense of danger. This was a feeling he had never felt when he faced the primordial Gomong King and crimson-scaled snake. Something is coming from the sky. Everyone be careful. Lin Yi did not dare to neglect and immediately reminded Cold and the others below. Cold and company immediately felt as though they were facing a formidable foe. They knew very well that this thing was no trifling matter. Otherwise, with Lin Yi's habits over the past few days, he wouldn't have been so nervous and cautious. He didn't even warn them and instead let them sense it themselves, using this as a test of their ability to react. For the past few days, Lin Yi wasn't playing the role of a pure guardian, but an instructor. However, it was clearly not the time to test them before figuring out the strength of that thing. Moments later, the thing was only half a kilometer away from them. Although it had an unfathomable aura lingering around it that could fool most people's perception, Lin Yi would have wasted all his years if he couldn't see its true form at this distance. Worm. Lin Yi was taken aback. It clearly had a pair of gigantic Gomong wings, but its body was a white and tender worm. This scene was so bizarre that it left him amused. How could it be a worm? Worm? What worm? Cold and company were baffled. Their perception range was not that far away. Even if it was that far away, they wouldn't be able to see through the unfathomable aura on the other party. Lin Yi didn't answer, but he didn't let his guard down. No matter how funny the other party's appearance was, his increasingly strong sense of danger wouldn't lie. In the cultivation world, people who judged people by their appearance generally didn't live long, and Lin Yi was never one of them. In the blink of an eye, the other party was less than 20 meters away from Lin Yi. It calmly landed on the trunk of a big tree on the opposite side, facing Lin Yi directly. "You're Lin Yi?" The brain-eating bug sized up Lin Yi with great interest. Lin Yi was slightly surprised when he heard that. He could guess that the other party was coming for his group, but he didn't expect the other party to call out his name. He immediately asked bluntly, "How do you know?" "Simple. It's because I ate primordial King Gomong," the brain-eating bug answered frankly. This answer immediately stunned everyone. Cold and company exchanged looks and could not help but suspect if the fellow was bragging. For such a tiny worm to be able to eat the massive primordial King Gomong, what kind of joke was that? Lin Yi fell into thought. He was momentarily unable to imagine how the other party had eaten primordial King Gomong, but his intuition told him that it was an extremely dangerous fellow, far more dangerous than primordial King Gomong. "Then, who are you?" Lin Yi continued asking. "Envoy. In their words, I'm that lord's envoy." The brain-eating bug remained very frank. "Envoy?" Lin Yi's eyes flashed slightly because he saw the pair of gigantic wings on the other party's back instantly vanish. Now it looked like a white worm through and through, appearing even more harmless. While Lin Yi was sizing up the brain-eating bug was also sizing him up. As for Cold and the others below, the brain-eating bug was not interested in them at all. It seemed to be only interested in Lin Yi. Are you here to capture the tributes as well? Lin Yi continued probing. This guy's reaction was completely different from all the other spirit beasts he'd met before. All the spirit beasts, including the ancient Gomang King and the red-scaled snake, had only cared about the number of tributes. They weren't interested in a troublesome human like him at all, completely different from this insect envoy. You can say that. The brain-eating bug's answer was non-committal. It was an envoy, unlike primordial King Gomang, who had to provide sufficient human tributes in order to survive. Even if it did nothing, it would not suffer any punishment. However, since they had encountered each other, it did not matter if it was just a little help. All right, I have no more questions. Lin Yi nodded. At the same time when he finished his sentence, Cold and the others understood and moved forward at the same time. This was the secret signal that they had agreed on earlier. Although it was very dangerous to do so at night, and they might encounter other unpredictable dangers ahead if they were not careful, but it was much better than everyone staying here in front of a strong enemy. Chapter 52-34. However, Lin Yi was already prepared for this. Before it could cast the wind blade, Lin Yi's figure flashed and blocked in front of it. Roar? You human really have a lot of guts. The brain-eating insect suddenly laughed. This scene was really funny in the eyes of those who did not know. Hearing this sentence from the mouth of a harmless white insect, even if Lin Yi knew that the other party was not simple, he could not help but feel strange and speechless at this time. As the brain-eating insect's voice fell, 2 wind blades immediately whistled out. The target changed from Cold and the others to Lin Yi, who was close at hand. At such a short distance there was no chance to dodge. As soon as the wind blades formed, they were directly attached to Lin Yi's body. If this continued, he would immediately be dismembered. Really? I think you have a lot of guts. Lin Yi replied unhurriedly. He did not take any action against the wind blades because it was not necessary. The real chi pill fire bomb condensed in his hand had been pressed on the other party's face in advance. Although it did not delay much time, Lin Yi had habitually maintained the real chi in his body at a higher intensity these days. The time to condense the real chi pill fire bomb was greatly reduced. At this time, the power of the attack was close to the limit of his strength. Boom! The tranquility of the night was shattered by a loud bang. The surrounding area of a few miles was razed to the ground in an instant. Within 100 miles, it was a mess. Many spirit beasts fled in panic. Cold and the others had escaped a certain distance at this moment, and with the previous experience, although everyone was in a sorry state, no one was injured. Phew! Lin Yi let out a long breath. If he detonated the real chi pill fire bomb at such a close distance in the past, he would inevitably suffer a heavy backlash, but now his speed was much faster than before when he was at his peak. Moreover, he could freely switch between the primordial spirit form and the semi-primordial spirit form, which was enough to avoid most of the backlash damage. However, it was different for the brain-eating worm, which bore the brunt of the attack. The pill fire bomb detonated right on its face and the damage was immeasurable. Even an existence like primordial Gomang King, who was comparable to a late-stage golden core expert, would definitely die from such a direct hit to his face. However, Lin Yi quickly frowned once more, and his frown was even tighter than before. Because his divine sense told him that not only did he not lose his life on the spot, he wasn't even heavily injured. Roar roar, as expected of a human who could kill the red-scaled snake. I have to say, you do have some ability. When Brain Eater reappeared, it was already a kilometer away. Apart from some scorch marks on its body, there were no other serious injuries, and it even looked rather relaxed. It said half jokingly and half fearfully, "Luckily, I copied the Gomang clan's shadow escape or I would have really suffered." This time Lin Yi was truly shocked. The real chi pill fire bomb was his strongest trump card. Apart from that, his other means, including the 5 elemental killing chi, were hardly a threat to an existence at the golden core stage. At the end of the day, he was only a primordial spirit. Even if he had mastered the primordial spirit form and the semi-primordial spirit form, which were unique to primordial spirits, they were still far inferior to the heaven-defying qualities of his main body. Lin Yi's heart sank as he looked at the guy's nonchalant face. It would have been easier to accept if the pure chi pill fire bomb hadn't hit the guy, but he clearly pressed it against his face and detonated it. Even if the guy had used a skill like Shadow Stripper, he wouldn't have been able to dodge the damage in the first instant. But all it did was scratch the guy's itch. How could he accept that? Let's go. Lung Lung, lead the team and take care of everyone. I'll meet up with you guys after luring it away. Lin Yi hurriedly communicated with Lung Lung and the others. He was not this nervous even when he faced the primordial Gomang King and the red-scaled snake at the same time. However, this time he really had no confidence at all. Luring the opponent away and meeting up with the others was the only way he could think of. This. Song Lingshan and the others looked at each other, worried. They never thought that things would become so serious. It was just a bug, how could it be so terrifying? Let's go. Lung Lung was the first to react. She immediately led the others away. She was very clear that the longer they stayed, the more danger Lin Yi would be in. There was no room for delay or hesitation in a matter of life and death. Looking at Lung Lung's back as she led the others away, Lin Yi's lips curled into a gratified smile. What made him even more gratified was that the bug had no intention of chasing after them. Its target was very clear, it was him. You seem to be very concerned about those people? The brain-eating bug wasn't in a hurry to attack. Instead, it asked with interest, does that matter? Since your target is me, letting them go should be something that doesn't matter to you. Am I right? Although Lin Yi was shocked, he did not show it on his face. He was still calm and at ease. Exactly. The brain-eating bug nodded. Its target from the beginning was not the so-called human tributes. After all, the tributes were prepared for that master. It was here to eat it alone. That's good. Why don't we wait a little longer? Lin Yi said casually. You're very interesting human. This is what you guys call pushing your luck, right? The brain-eating bug laughed. A bug's face showed all kinds of human-like expressions. This scene was weird no matter how one looked at it. Not really. In my understanding, this is called friendly negotiation, Lin Yi said shamelessly. Friendly negotiation? The brain-eating bug was stunned for a moment before it realized what it meant. It suddenly laughed so hard that its entire body arched. It said breathlessly, well, it seems that I didn't come in the wrong this time. You're indeed a rare human sample. Sample? Lin Yi pretended to be surprised, but he was relieved in his heart. If this guy insisted on making a move to keep Lung Lung and the others, he would not be able to do anything. He had to admit that this bug was actually quite smart. Yes, it's a sample. In your human language, it basically means food, but it's slightly different, the brain-eating bug said bluntly. Chapter 5235. It's your honor. To be able to become my food, you have to be at least a character like the primordial Gomang King. Even if the average person was sent to my mouth, I wouldn't like to eat them. The brain-eating bug said bluntly. This was the truth. Eating brains was its innate ability, but it wasn't just eating. The key was that after eating the brain, it could copy the other party's ability. If it was an average person, it wouldn't benefit much even if it ate them. It would just be a waste of energy. Oh, then don't I have to thank you for your favor? Lin Yi said with a faint smile. You're welcome. The brain-eating bug was frank. After waiting for a moment, it said, it's about time. I'm going to make my move. With that said, without waiting for Lin Yi's reaction, the brain-eating bug's body suddenly grew a lot longer. The wings were still on its back, but its body had become a giant snake. At first glance, it had the charm of a red-scaled snake. Not only that, but its snake body also grew 4 extremely sharp claws. It was unknown what kind of powerful spirit beast its original form was, but just a glance was enough to make one shudder in fear. What a monster! Lin Yi sighed when he saw this. If this guy's image continued to develop, it would probably become a knockoff version of a dragon. Sighing was one thing, but Lin Yi's actions weren't slow at all. Taking advantage of this moment, he had already condensed a true chi pill firebomb in his hand. Even though he knew he couldn't kill the other party, he could only do so. After all, it was his most powerful means. Again? You really don't want to give up. This time, the brain-eating bug didn't use the primordial Gomang race's shadow escape to retreat. Instead, it directly clawed at the primordial Gomang race and exploded it on the spot. It was unyielding and domineering. So fierce. Lin Yi's eyelids twitched. He knew his opponent wasn't simple, but he didn't expect it to be this strong. Even if the true chi pill firebomb's power hadn't reached its limit, it definitely couldn't be underestimated. As a result, after the true chi pill firebomb detonated, the brain-eating insect's body had a few more scorched black scars. The injury was more serious than before, but it was still not to the point of hurting the muscles and bones. Instead, it stimulated its fierceness. It immediately roared and rushed over to swallow Lin Yi. Unfortunately, Lin Yi did not give her the chance at all. As early as the moment when the true Chidan firebomb detonated, he had already used the aftermath to escape a long distance away. Of course, the direction he chose was completely opposite to Cold and the others. Otherwise, it would be meaningless to delay for so long. You escaped pretty fast, but it's a pity that you met me. The brain-eating bug looked at Lin Yi, who had become a small black dot in the distance, and smiled. With a flap of its wings, it immediately chased after him. The brain-eater was very fast, but it was much slower than Lin Yi. Even if Lin Yi escaped on the ground and it flew in the sky, it could only hang on. It was not easy to close the distance. This guy's speed isn't slow. Lin Yi looked back at the brain-eating insect in the sky. Although he said so, his expression was relaxed. Not to mention anything else, at least in terms of speed, he had absolute confidence. As long as he wanted to, he could get rid of the opponent in minutes because he was only using the super butterfly subtle steps at the moment. There was still the super extreme butterfly subtle steps that he hadn't used yet. For Lin Yi, it was not a good thing to get rid of the opponent too early because it was likely to transfer the danger to Cold and the others. Anyway, he had enough confidence to escape. Hanging on to the brain-eating insect like this was the best choice. However, this was not without any risk. With the strength that the brain-eating insect had just shown, Lin Yi was not willing to fight it at close range even if he was beaten to death. If he was not careful, he would either die or be injured. If he attracted some powerful spirit beast during his escape, the consequences would be hard to predict. While Lin Yi was planning, the brain-eating insect was also planning. It was not stupid. In fact, it had already seen through Lin Yi's intention. It knew that Lin Yi still had some strength left and could speed up to get rid of it at any time, but it still had absolute confidence. As far as it knew, any human practitioner had a limited amount of chi. Running for his life like this would consume a lot of his chi, and by the time he ran out of it, he'd be at the end of his rope, completely at its mercy. Moreover, it had a secret weapon. It was not afraid that Lin Yi would really escape from its palm. No matter how far Lin Yi escaped, it would be useless. It would always be able to grasp the opponent's position. One man and one beast continued like this for the whole night. Seeing that the sky was bright, the brain-eating insect finally felt that something was wrong. It could not help but mutter, "What's wrong with this human? Where did he get so much true energy?" It would never have thought that Lin Yi had a cheating device like the Jade Pendant Space. If it was purely a battle of consumption, he would naturally be in an invincible position. Just like now, Lin Yi was still alive and kicking. On the contrary, the brain-eating insect was a little overwhelmed. No matter how strong it was, it could not withstand a whole night of relentless pursuit. At this moment, Lin Yi's speed suddenly increased a lot. In the blink of an eye, he escaped out of the brain-eating insect's perception range. He's finally starting to use his true energy to escape. It seems that this human's true energy is almost consumed. The brain-eating insect was not surprised. Instead, it smiled proudly. No matter how fast you run, you won't be able to escape from my traces. Traces was the innate ability of the thousand-eyed wolf spider. Now, it had also become one of the abilities of the brain-eating insect. As long as it left a trace of undetectable spider silk on the other party, then no matter where the other party escaped, it would not be able to escape its pursuit. This spider silk was extremely thin. Not only was it invisible to the naked eye, but it was also difficult to distinguish it with divine sense. Previously, when Lin Yi deliberately delayed talking, the brain-eating insect was so cooperative because it wanted to beat him at his own game and leave a spider silk on Lin Yi. As the brain-eating insect said, it was very picky about its food. Once it targeted someone, it would definitely die. This was because it would use all kinds of methods, and it was impossible to guard against it. To be precise, it was impossible to guard against it at all. Lin Yi really did not notice the spider silk on his body. After all, this thing was too thin and too light. Even with his divine sense, it was difficult to detect it. Unless he had taken precautions and carried out a comprehensive and specialized inspection, even an immortal would fall for it. With such a brilliant tracking method, the brain-eating insect was naturally sitting on a fishing platform. No matter how fast and far Lin Yi escaped in front of its traces, it would be a futile struggle. Chapter 5236. However, at this moment there was a sudden change. Lin Yi's trace suddenly disappeared from its mind without any warning. The brain-eating bug was stunned for a long time and could not say a word for a long time. It was still complacent that everything was under control. Wasn't this a slap in the face? After a long time, the brain-eating bug finally became angry. This cunning human. Could it be that he had discovered my tracks from the very beginning and had been acting in order to numb my senses? Damn bastard. Little did it know that Linny did not know any traces at all. He just wanted to ensure that he could completely shake off the other party, so he completely transformed from the primordial spirit form to the primordial spirit form. No matter how clever the traces were, they still needed to be attached to a physical body to be effective. When Lin Yi transformed into the primordial spirit form, the spider silk had no place to attach, so it naturally lost its meaning. This was purely a coincidence. Fortunately, Lin Yi did not stop practicing for the past few months and mastered the switching between the primordial spirit form, the semi-primordial spirit form, and the primordial spirit form. Otherwise he would have suffered a big loss unknowingly. After carefully confirming several times that the brain-eating bug did not catch up, Lin Yi finally returned to the primordial spirit form and returned to the ground. Although it was not impossible to maintain the primordial spirit form, after all, this state could be immune to most of the damage. However, once there was a special emergency, this state was also very fragile and could be said to have no defense. In this ancient trial ground with all kinds of dangers, the primordial spirit form was no different from a small boat drifting in the sea. Any huge wave could be a disaster. In contrast, the primordial spirit form was more likely to be injured, but at least he could use all kinds of trump cards. More importantly, Lin Yi was more used to this form that was close to his original body. Otherwise, he would always feel weird if he kept transforming into a primordial spirit and floating in the sky. After returning to the ground, the first thing Lin Yi did was to find Cold and the rest. After all, they were still too weak. It would be fine if they were only facing a Foundation Establishment stage threat, but if they encountered a Golden Core stage spirit beast, the consequences were simply unimaginable. If this dragged on, Lin Yi really could not rest assured. However, it was not easy to find Cold and the rest at this time. They had escaped for the whole night with the Super Butterfly Microstep. Even if they were not completely in the opposite direction, the distance was definitely not a little bit. It was at least hundreds of miles away. In this vast ancient trial ground, it was easier said than done to find someone from such a far distance. It would be better if they were in a plain area with a clear view. At worst, they could just change into their primordial spirit form and float around in the sky. It would not be that difficult to find traces of Cold and the others. However, there were primeval forests everywhere. They could not even see the situation under their feet when they were floating in the air, let alone looking into the distance. Especially since this place was similar to the previous trial ground, the divine sense could not be expanded too far. The only way Lin Yi could use now was to determine the route of Cold and the rest, then rush to the front of the crowd at the fastest speed. At the same time, he maintained the largest range of divine sense perception to avoid any mistakes. This way he would have a chance to meet with the rest in a short period of time. Lin Yi's speed was extremely fast. Even if he encountered a spirit beast along the way, there was no delay. After all, even the brain-eating worm could not catch up with his speed, let alone these ordinary spirit beasts. They wanted to block the way, but unfortunately, Lin Yi did not care about them at all. He directly rushed past them. They could only look at him in the dust. What could they do? After an hour, Lin Yi suddenly stopped. It was not a problem with his vital energy or physical strength, but because there were traces of humans in his divine sense perception. This position was unlikely to be Cold and the rest, but Lin Yi still wanted to find out the specific situation. He did not mind helping the disciples of the Archaic Alliance along the way. He might even meet some familiar faces. Lin Yi frowned slightly. This place was not on the periphery of any main road. It was already deep in the jungle. He could vaguely find a series of footprints of human cultivators on the ground. However, this series of footprints stopped abruptly after reaching an open space. Lin Yi took a look at the surrounding environment. At first glance, it looked ordinary. There was nothing special and there was no dangerous aura. There was even no trace of the activities of spirit beasts, which were very common in other places. The environment revealed a fresh and pleasant smell. It was completely a place like a paradise. More importantly, there were no human cultivators in the range of Lin Yi's divine sense perception. In other words, a person disappeared into thin air after coming here. Logically, unless this person could fly, otherwise no matter how strong he was, he would inevitably leave some traces. It was the same even if he climbed up the tree. The scene in front of him was a little inexplicable. He could not say that he could transform into the form of the primordial spirit like Lin Yi, right? Lin Yi could not figure out the reason at the moment, but he was sure that there must be something wrong with this environment. It was just that he did not know where the problem was. After continuing to observe for a while, he still did not find any abnormalities or flaws. Lin Yi decided not to waste any more time. The reason why he stopped was just a whim to see if he would encounter any familiar faces. For him, meeting with Cold and the rest was the top priority. It was meaningless to continue to stay here. However, at the moment when he was ready to move, there was suddenly a slight movement behind him. Lin Yi did not look back, but his divine sense perception had already told him what happened. It was the sound of flowers blooming. Less than 3 steps behind him, a vermilion flower bud bloomed quietly at a place half the height of a person. It was bright, beautiful, and had a refreshing and elegant fragrance. Danger. Lin Yi immediately noticed the additional trace of inexplicable danger in the environment. It was obvious that the danger came from this beautiful flower that seemed harmless. As expected, the flower suddenly opened up in an instant. There were rows of ferocious saw-teeth growing in the petals. The entire flower turned into a giant mouth that chose a person to swallow. Its momentum was as fast as lightning. It was about to swallow Lin Yi in one gulp. Chapter 52-37. The man-eating flowers bite missed, but the crisis was not over. Just as Lin Yi dodged it, another man-eating flower appeared less than 3 steps away from him. It was identical in size and shape. This time Lin Yi could not dodge in time. He felt his vision darken and a thought flashed through his mind. Flower blooms on the same stalk. Vermilion redbud. Vermilion redbud was the name of a flower. From the appearance of these 2 man-eating flowers, they were indeed the vermilion redbud that was commonly seen in the secular world. However, the vermilion redbud in the secular world was not as ferocious and terrifying as the man-eating flowers. Instead, it was purely an ornamental flower. If Lin Yi had realized that it was a vermilion redbud, he would not have fallen for it so easily. This was because the vermilion redbud had a more official name, the twin flower. As the saying goes, when a flower blooms on a single stalk, the twin stalk flower would always grow in opposite directions and would never exist alone. Since this man-eating flower had the same characteristics as the twin stalk flower, it was only natural that it would grow in opposite directions. When he saw one, he had to be prepared to defend against 2. Unfortunately, Lin Yi realized this a little too late. Just as he was about to be bitten by the bingdi flower, Lin Yi suddenly had a flash of inspiration, and he immediately gave up on the idea of turning into his soul form and running for his life. Instead, he jumped right into the creature's mouth. He wanted to see just what kind of existence this bingdi flower was. Those sharp teeth did not harm a single hair on Lin Yi's body. In the pitch-black darkness, he felt as if he had entered a tunnel and was quickly transported to the depths of the ground. After a while, his surroundings suddenly became clear. There was even some light. Even without using his divine sense, he could clearly see his surroundings. At first glance, it looked like a tree hole with a diameter of less than 10 meters. However, it was not an ordinary tree hole. Instead, it was an extremely active tree hole. There were countless green tentacles extending from the walls of the hole. Any one of them could entangle a person and cause them to be unable to move. There were 4 tentacles wrapped around Lin Yi's body, and not only were these green tentacles tight, but there were also sharp needles on their tips that made his scalp numb. Surprisingly, a drop of dark green liquid was coming out of the tip. It seemed that it was going to be injected into Lin Yi's body. This time Lin Yi did not dare to let his guard down. It was fine if it was only a little strangulation, but if this unknown dangerous juice was injected into his body, who knew what the consequences would be? There was no need to struggle or waste any energy. Lin Yi's method of breaking free from the 4 green tentacles was very simple. He transformed into his primordial spirit, and they all instantly fell to nothing. After realizing that he had missed his target, not only these 4 green tentacles, but all the other tentacles in the tree hole also went crazy, frantically searching for traces of Lin Yi. Unfortunately, Lin Yi was now a ball of primordial spirit, so no matter how hard they tried, it was all in vain. These tentacles did not go crazy for too long. After confirming that Lin Yi was not in the cave, they quickly calmed down, even though Lin Yi appeared in the form of a nascent soul again. They didn't react at all, completely treating Lin Yi as air. Lin Yi was not surprised by this. By now he had basically understood. Although this bingdi man-eating flower had the tendency to become a plant spirit, it was still a far cry from the real spirit that he had seen in the past. For example, the half-moon lake at the back mountain of the North Island in Heaven Step. Not only was there a huge difference in level, but even the degree of evolution was the same. The half-moon lake had a completely independent individual consciousness. Furthermore, there were other advanced techniques that were similar to divine sense. However, this bingdi man-eating flower didn't have any. It seemed to be acting on its own instincts. After avoiding its instinctive ability to distinguish between friend and foe, it was completely blind. However, what made Lin Yi puzzled was why an existence like this, whose evolution was far from complete, would deliberately leave him alive just now. Could it be that it was the same as the other spirit beasts and needed to be left alive to offer tribute to that lord? Logically speaking, the biggest instinct of the Bingdi man-eating flower was to hunt. When a prey like Lin Yi fell into its mouth, it would definitely bite him into pieces. This way it would be easier to digest and absorb him. However, when Lin Yi fell into its mouth just now, those dangerous and ferocious teeth surprisingly chose to restrain themselves and send him into the cave unscathed. If that wasn't the case, Lin Yi wouldn't have suddenly changed his mind and walked into the trap. He just wanted to see what kind of background this Bingdi man-eating flower had. Lin Yi looked around. At this moment he suddenly heard a faint shout from below. At first it sounded rather familiar. When the voice was heard again, Lin Yi immediately reacted. Fei Yangxing. It turned out that the series of footprints he saw previously belonged to Fei Yangxing. This guy was really unlucky to actually fall into the mouth of the Bingdi man-eating flower. To Lin Yi, although Fei Yangxing wasn't really one of his people, he was more or less related to him. Since he had encountered Fei Yangxing, he naturally wouldn't leave him in the lurch. He immediately transformed into his primordial spirit and went down. As expected, there was also a sealed tree hole below, and Fei Yangxing was tied up in the middle by a bunch of green tentacles. Seeing this, Lin Yi smiled. He immediately condensed his primordial spirit and appeared in front of him. Fei Yangxing only felt his vision blur. At first he didn't dare to believe it. However, he immediately reacted and instantly exclaimed, "Senior Lin, you were also trapped?" Hee, you can say that. Lin Yi smiled noncommittally. That's not right. Why aren't you tied up by these things? Fei Yangxing looked at Lin Yi's relaxed expression in disbelief. From the looks of it, Lin Yi wasn't trapped at all. He was obviously here for sightseeing. Oh, because they are reasonable. Lin Yi casually made up a story. I'm already in this situation. Senior Lin, please don't tease me. Fei Yangxing smiled bitterly. I'm not teasing you. Can't you see that they are ignoring me? Lin Yi curled his lips and then asked, by the way, how did you get caught here? This place isn't on the main road at all. With your strength, how did you get the courage to wander in the dense forest alone? Fei Yangxing's strength was only at the peak of the middle stage of the foundation building realm. Even among the experts of the same level, he was far from outstanding. It was thanks to Lin Yi that he was able to obtain the qualification to participate in the primordial trial this time. If he wandered into the dense forest alone with his strength, he would definitely die without a burial place in minutes. Chapter 5238. Escape. Lin Yi was slightly taken aback. Yes, we encountered a giant one-eyed bear along the way. Its strength was at least in the middle stage of the Golden Core realm. That guy was extremely ferocious. Even Duanmuyu was sent flying by its slap, not to mention the rest of us. Most of us were captured alive by it. Thanks to my quick reflexes, I escaped into the dense forest and barely escaped. In the end, before I could rejoice, I became like this, Fei Yangxing said dejectedly. You mean Duanmuyu is dead? Lin Yi raised his eyebrows. He had a rather deep impression of Duanmuyu, and his impression of her was not bad. It would be quite a pity if she died just like that. That shouldn't be the case. After she was sent flying by the giant one-eyed bear, she didn't appear again. In my opinion, she was definitely injured, but not to the point of death. After all, she was one of the strongest cultivators in the Foundation establishment realm. Fei Yangxing shook his head. That's not too bad, Lin Yi nodded. Sigh, if I knew this would happen, I wouldn't have been blinded by greed and chose to follow Duanmuyu. It would have been much better if I had followed Senior Lin. At the very least, I wouldn't have ended up like this. Fei Yangxing sighed with a look of regret. You think too much. Lin Yi laughed and shook his head. You only encountered a giant one-eyed bear in the middle stage of the Golden Core realm. I encountered the primordial Gomang King and the red-scaled snake, both of which were powerful spirit beasts in the late stage of the Golden Core realm. After that, I encountered countless spirit beasts of all sizes, and I even encountered an unfathomable brain-eating worm. According to my speculation, it was at least an invincible existence in the Golden Core realm. Do you think you would have a good ending by following me? So ferocious. Fei Yangxing was dumbfounded. Compared to what Lin Yi said, the giant one-eyed bear was simply an obedient baby. Fei Yangxing was nothing. Otherwise, why would you see me here? Lin Yi asked with his lips curled. Well, that's true. Fei Yangxing smiled sheepishly. Now that even Lin Yi had fallen to such a state, there was no need to mention the others who followed him. Fortunately, he had chosen Duanmu Yu's path. In comparison, the difficulty was relatively easy. Otherwise, if he really followed Lin Yi, it would be a complete nightmare. As the two of them spoke, the surrounding green tentacles bound Fei Yangxing tighter and tighter. One of the tentacles was especially thick, and its sharp needle, dripping with dark green liquid, was about to stab into Fei Yangxing's body. Fei Yangxing was so scared that he almost wet his pants. He quickly shouted, "Senior Lin, save me." Before he finished speaking, Lin Yi had already made his move. A beam of 5 elements murderous chi with a low dragon roar met the tentacle head-on. The tentacle immediately broke without any suspense, and Fei Yangxing finally escaped death. However, before he could breathe a sigh of relief, the numerous green tentacles around him all went crazy. As if they had poked a hornet's nest, all the tentacles began to attack wildly. What made Fei Yangxing want to cry was that these tentacles only targeted him from the beginning to the end. Lin Yi, who was standing in front of him, was not affected at all. It was as if he was treated as air. The Bingdi man-eating flower could not sense the existence of Lin Yi at all. What's going on? Fei Yangxing was on the verge of tears. With his meager strength, how could he withstand the crazy attacks of so many tentacles? Moreover, he was tied up tightly at the moment. He didn't even have the chance to dodge, let alone counterattack. Of course, Lin Yi would not leave Fei Yangxing to die. He immediately attacked with several beams of 5 elements murderous chi and cut off the green tentacles that bound Fei Yangxing. Although this could not completely solve Fei Yangxing's predicament, at least it gave him a chance to struggle and save himself. Fei Yangxing was like a drowning man grasping at the last life-saving straw. He couldn't care less about the residual injuries in his body and hurriedly began to dodge with all his strength. He wanted to avoid being hit as much as he could. As for counterattacking, it was simply a fantasy to him and he didn't even need to think about it. A person's potential was limitless. The strength that Fei Yangxing displayed at this moment was far beyond his realm. Unfortunately, even so, he could only struggle for a little longer. If this continued, he would still die of exhaustion. "Senior Lin, save me." Fei Yangxing could only beg for help with a bitter face. He had no choice. He had to beg for help or he would die. However, this time Lin Yi did not pay attention to him. Instead, he stood at the side thoughtfully and watched the show. This time, Fei Yangxing really cried. He was busy dodging, otherwise he would really kneel in front of Lin Yi. In a short period of time, Fei Yangxing had already suffered 4 or 5 hits. Although he was lucky to avoid being hit in the vital parts every time, his skin and flesh were still torn, and he was seriously injured. If these hits continued, he would really be dead. Fortunately, Lin Yi did not give up on him completely. Just when Fei Yangxing was about to collapse, Lin Yi suddenly used the frenzied fire fist. A terrifying heat immediately surged. Seeing this, Fei Yangxing's eyes lit up. Although he did not know how the Bingdi man-eating flower became a spirit, he was sure that fire was definitely the natural enemy of plants. However, Fei Yangxing found that Lin Yi's frenzied fire fist was directly aimed at his face. He was so frightened that he hurriedly shouted, "Wrong! Wrong! Senior Lin, don't hit me." Lin Yi did not pay attention to him. The frenzied fire fist directly landed on Fei Yangxing's body. As for the green tentacles that were attacking him crazily, they retreated to the side. It seemed that they were really afraid of fire. After a while, Fei Yangxing finally recovered. He spat out a mouthful of black smoke. His whole body was charred black and he staggered to his feet. As soon as he saw Lin Yi, he hurriedly hid, afraid that Lin Yi would punch him again. The Bingdi man-eating flower did not kill him. Instead, he died in the hands of Lin Yi. How wronged. Why are you hiding? Lin Yi looked at him with amusement. Ah. Fei Yangxing did not react immediately. He was about to kneel down and beg for mercy. In his current state, if Lin Yi wanted to kill him, it would be a piece of cake. He did not even need to move his finger. Lin Yi just had to stand by and watch and Fei Yangxing would be dead for sure. Don't you understand? Look around you. Lin Yi advised. Fei Yangxing was confused. When he heard this, he subconsciously looked behind him and was suddenly stunned. This was because he realized that the green tentacles that were attacking him crazily just now were not moving at all. They did not have any intention of attacking him. Chapter 5239. It's simple. I cracked its prey recognition mechanism. Lin Yi smiled. Prey identification mechanism? Fei Yangxing didn't quite understand. That's right. I discovered it just now. Do you know why the tentacles only attacked you and not me when we are both here? Linny asked. Isn't it because they are reasonable? Fei Yangxing said weakly. You really believe it? Linny looked at him as if he was looking at a rare animal. Fei Yangxing was speechless. He didn't believe such nonsense at first, but he couldn't think of any other explanation. There is only one real reason. You are stained with the unique juice of the Bingdi man-eating flower, but I don't have it on me. Linny revealed the answer. The juice of the Bingdi man-eating flower? Fei Yangxing was stunned for a moment before he realized that his body was indeed sticky. He must have been stained from the beginning. However, he was in a dangerous situation that he had never been in before since he was swallowed. He was worried about his own life, so how could he be in the mood to pay attention to such trivial things? That's right. This juice is how it identifies its prey. As long as you are stained with the juice, you are its prey. It will use all means to deal with you. However, if you are not stained with the juice, you are like air to it. It will turn a blind eye to you just like how it treated me just now. Linny explained. He didn't understand this problem at first. It was only after he compared the difference between himself and Fei Yangxing that he realized that he had gotten rid of all the foreign objects attached to him after he transformed into his primordial spirit form. Of course, Fei Yangxing couldn't use this method, so he could only rely on the scorching flames of the frenzy fist to dry himself. Fei Yangxing took a long time to understand. He looked at his charred body and shook his head with a bitter smile. You didn't have to use this method, did you? I was almost scared to death. This was the truth. Even if he wasn't scared to death, he was scared to the point of peeing his pants. He was just dried by the frenzied fire fist. How else could I get you out of danger? Linny smiled. That's true. Thank you for saving my life, Senior Lin. Fei Yangxing hurriedly expressed his gratitude. Although he was in a sorry state, it was better than losing his life. You're welcome. It was nothing. Linny waved his hand indifferently. No matter what, Fei Yangxing had done some things for him in the past. Even if he had not made any contributions, he had worked hard. It would be unreasonable for him not to help in this situation. Fei Yangxing took a long time to recover. His injuries were not light to begin with, and he had no choice but to endure the frenzied fist. Even if it was not at its full power, a layer of his skin had been burnt off. This suffering was not easy to endure. Senior Lin, how are we going to get out? Fei Yangxing asked anxiously. Even though the Bingdi man-eating flower no longer treated him as prey and the green tentacles around him were no longer threatening him, it was still not a good idea to be trapped in this place forever. In the end, he still had to think of a way to get out. It's very convenient for me to get out, but it's a little troublesome for you. Linny looked at him and said. If it was Linny himself, he would only need to transform into his primordial spirit form and he would be able to get out unimpeded. But now that there was an additional Fei Yangxing, he could not just leave him here. How troublesome. Senior, if you need anything, just tell me. I promise I won't hesitate even if I have to climb a mountain of swords or plunge into a pot of boiling oil. Fei Yangxing hurriedly patted his chest and said. He was afraid that Linny would leave him this burden. There's nothing to tell you. All right, you can hide in the corner lest I accidentally injure you. As Linny spoke, a true chi pill fire bomb suddenly appeared in his hand. After Fei Yangxing had rolled and crawled to the furthest corner, Linny immediately pressed it under his feet. In his opinion, since this tree hole was a part of the Bingdi man-eating flower, even if he could not directly blow up a hole, he would still be able to find another way. Boom. The power of the pure chi pill fire bomb wasn't at its limit, but it was more than enough to blow up a place like this. The result was out of Lin Yi's expectations. The tree hole was destroyed, but there wasn't the exit he'd expected. It was pitch black everywhere, and the only thing visible was a bottomless hole at the bottom. Senior Lin, where is this? Fei Yangxing hurriedly asked. I don't know either. Linny shook his head. He had already used his divine sense to explore a radius of several miles. The result was only one discovery. This was a very deep underground. Even Linny could not figure out where this place was. Fei Yangxing was even more confused. He could only continue to ask anxiously, what should we do? There are two ways. The conservative one is to dig a hole while climbing up. Sooner or later we will be able to return to the surface. Linny casually said. This was an out-and-out stupid method, but it would not be wrong. At most, it would take a little more time and energy. Why not be conservative? Fei Yangxing asked. Do you see the hole below? Let's go down and explore. Linny said. Let's not do this. This hole makes me feel scared. Senior Lin, why don't we go up and dig a hole to get out? Fei Yangxing suggested. I am a little curious about this deep hole. Since you want to dig a hole to get out, then let's say goodbye. Linny said. He pretended to jump into the hole. Although the immediate priority was to meet with Lung Lung and others, Linny always felt that there was a mysterious and unfathomable strange aura below. He would not feel at ease if he did not explore it. Don't. I will go too. Senior, wherever you go, I will go. Fei Yangxing hurriedly said. He did not dare to act alone even if he was beaten to death. It was rare to meet such a thick thigh like Lin Yi. If he did not know to cling to it, then he would be a fool. Maybe there is some great danger hidden below. Just think about it. Lin Yi smiled noncommittally. He immediately jumped into the hole without saying anything. Fei Yangxing hesitated for a moment, but then he gritted his teeth and jumped down. If I die, I die. The two fell down in the darkness. Fortunately, the hole was not wide. As long as they stretched their arms and legs slightly, they could touch the wall of the hole. In this way they could control the speed of their fall and avoid the impact when they landed too fast. After a while, Lin Yi suddenly reminded, it seems to be the bottom. Be careful. Chapter 52-40. Soon, Lin Yi calmly landed on the ground with Fei Yangxing following closely behind. Both of them were stunned by the scene in front of them. There was actually such a garden so deep underground. This was not only unimaginable, it had completely subverted Lin Yi's view of the world. Didn't all these beautiful flowers need sunlight? Senior, we seem to have discovered an extraordinary place. Fei Yangxing suddenly became excited. His focus was completely different from Lin Yi's. He discovered that there were many extremely precious spiritual herbs among the surrounding flowers. Any one of them would be invaluable in the market of the primordial underworld. Indeed. Lin Yi nodded slightly. These spiritual herbs were nothing to him. After all, his spiritual herb reserve was started on the Heaven Stage Island. Many of the spiritual herbs he collected were rare even on the Heaven Stage Island. Even so, it was undeniable that this place was not simple. After a few days of exploration, Lin Yi had a general understanding of the ancient training grounds. Although the density of the qi wasn't too bad, it might be because of the dense distribution of spirit beasts, so it was hard to find many elixirs outside. Rare elixirs were even rarer. Rare elixirs like the one in front of him right now was probably the only shop in the entire ancient training grounds that had such rare elixirs. There was no other shop in the entire ancient training grounds that had such rare elixirs. However, why was there such a magical place underground? Ignoring his own injuries, Fei Yangming hastily began to frantically pick all kinds of rare spirit herbs in the surroundings. He didn't care about the others. To him, spirit herbs represented a large amount of spirit jades. Nothing in the world was more important than spirit jades. Wait. Lin Yi suddenly stopped him. What's wrong? Fei Yangxing's heart suddenly skipped a beat. He thought that Lin Yi wanted to fight with him for these rare spiritual herbs. He quickly said with a bitter face, Senior, there are so many rare spiritual herbs here. It's impossible for the two of us to pick them all. Even if you eat them all, you won't be able to take them away. Why don't you let me have a share? Eating alone? Lin Yi smiled when he heard that. He pointed at the thing in his hand and said, Take a good look at what you've picked first. Isn't this the legendary scarlet flame fruit? It's worth quite a lot of money in the ancient martial world. It's worth at least 10 pieces of spiritual jade. Fei Yangxing said happily. Given the rarity of spiritual jades in the primordial underworld, 10 spiritual jades were already a huge sum of money. Open your eyes wide and look carefully. Are you sure this is a scarlet flame fruit? Lin Yi rolled his eyes at him. Fei Yangxing carefully observed it again. Only then did he realize that although the fruit in his hand looked exactly the same as the scarlet flame fruit at first glance, it had an additional fine grain that wasn't obvious. He couldn't help but be stunned. Could it be a variant of the scarlet flame fruit? A variant? Lin Yi shook his head and laughed. He walked over, snatched the fruit and threw it away. Fei Yangxing panicked. Even if it wasn't a scarlet flame fruit, he couldn't just throw it away like that. In the end, before he could even complain, he heard a loud explosion from the fruit, and the surrounding area was instantly razed to the ground. Fei Yangxing was instantly dumbfounded. He only came back to his senses after a while and stammered, How? How did this happen? Remember, this is an explosive flame fruit. It will explode when it's fully ripe. If you let it explode even if you bump it a little, its power is more than enough to deal with a peak foundation building middle stage cultivator like you. Lin Yi pursed his lips. I didn't know that this thing is so dangerous. Senior, you saved my life again. Fei Yangxing quickly apologized with an embarrassed smile. He said fawningly, Senior, you're really knowledgeable. Luckily I followed you here. Otherwise, I wouldn't even know how I died if I were as blind as you. Be careful. Otherwise, no matter how good the spiritual medicine is, you won't be able to take it even if you pick it. Linny reminded him, but he secretly kept an eye on him. This place was really strange. Unlike the well-known scarlet flame fruit, the exploding flame fruit was an extremely unpopular and rare elixir. Due to its extremely unstable nature, it was very difficult for it to grow naturally. It was already not bad to see one or two. However, with a glance, there were at least 18 exploding flame fruits in the surrounding mysterious garden. For the exploding flame fruit, this density had far exceeded the range of natural growth. There was only one possibility. These explosive flame fruits were planted by humans. But why would there be humans here? This was the thing that Linny was most curious about. Therefore, he did not hesitate to detonate the explosive flame fruit. He wanted to alert the enemy. In the end, there was no reaction at all. Fei Yangxing was still collecting the spiritual medicine in high spirits. However, his movements were much more careful than before. He checked every spiritual medicine carefully again and again before he dared to pick it. He was afraid that he would encounter a dangerous spiritual medicine like the explosive flame fruit again. It would be too unjust to die to such a thing. Linny did not stay idle either. Occasionally he would find rare spiritual medicines like the explosive flame fruit. He would also put them into the space in the jade pendant. However, he was more concerned about the secret of this mysterious garden. This place wasn't too big, but it wasn't too small either. It was at least 10 miles in circumference, and Linny was sure that he'd be able to find some clues as to what was going on. What was the connection between this place and the twin piranha flower? Not long after, Fei Yangxing's bag of various spiritual medicines was filled to the brim. He would not be able to take any more. He could only look at the spiritual medicines on the ground with a pained expression and sigh. Sigh, there are so many rare spiritual medicines but I can't pick them. What a pity. If this wasn't a primeval smelting ground that only appeared once in 1,000 years, he would absolutely gather all the spirit herbs that could be gathered before him, not leaving a single one behind. After all, those were a large amount of spirit jades. I advise you to stop before you go too far. Are you sure you can take such a big bag of spiritual medicines? Linny looked at him doubtfully. Chapter 52-41. I'll take it with me even if I have to die. Fei Yangxing looked determined. His heart was bleeding from the pain. If he couldn't even bring a bag of elixirs back, he would regret it for the rest of his life. Suit yourself. Linny didn't bother to persuade Fei Yangxing anymore. If it was cold and the others, he wouldn't have said anything and kept them in the jade pendant space. He could just refine them into elixirs and distribute them later. Unfortunately, Fei Yangxing was doing his best to remind Fei Yangxing. After all, Fei Yangxing was far from being one of them. Fei Yangxing couldn't help but feel nervous when he saw Lin Yi's expression. He asked cautiously, Senior, you won't leave me here, right? What do you think? Lin Yi looked at him with a faint smile. Strictly speaking, saving his life just now was very kind considering their relationship. If Fei Yangxing really became a burden, any normal person wouldn't protect him anymore. Lin Yi was no exception. Ugh. Fei Yangxing looked at the bag of elixirs troubled. Naturally, he knew that Lin Yi wouldn't leave him to fend for himself, but he wouldn't waste too much energy on him either. He wouldn't take any risks for him, and he'd have to make sure he had the ability to escape if anything happened or he'd die. However, he couldn't throw away so many rare elixirs, could he? Fei Yangxing struggled for a long time. Finally, he gritted his teeth and poured out the whole bag of rare elixirs. This guy has some courage. Lin Yi looked at him in a new light. At Fei Yangxing's level, pouring out such a big bag of rare elixirs was no different than an ordinary person in the secular world giving up a big prize of hundreds of millions. It required a lot of courage and awareness, which was quite rare. Before Lin Yi could even praise him, Fei Yangxing took out a small pouch from his pocket and picked out the most valuable herbs. He didn't give up on the rest of the herbs either, putting them back in the big pouch he'd brought with him. Lin Yi was speechless. He had already seen through this guy's plan. There was a saying that people would die for wealth and birds would die for food. It was indeed true. Senior, do you mind? Fei Yangxing smiled apologetically. His plan was very simple. If there was no particularly dangerous accident, he would carry all of them back. If the situation was critical, he would abandon the big bags and keep the small ones. No matter what, he could not return empty-handed from the treasure mountain, so he might as well let him die. I don't mind. Of course you can make your own decisions. Besides, you are so quick-witted. Lin Yi said with a hint of playfulness. Senior, you must be joking. Fei Yangxing blushed. However, since Lin Yi didn't object, he wouldn't give up on his own. After all, it was a lot of spiritual jades. The two of them continued forward, and not long after, a river appeared in front of them. The river was 7 to 8 meters wide, and at first glance it looked calm. The river water flowed slowly and was so clear that the bottom could be seen, and it emitted an indescribable refreshing aura that refreshed one's spirit. River of divine knowledge? Fei Yangxing was overjoyed when he saw this. The most important thing in the entire primordial trial land was the river of divine knowledge. It was also the biggest reason he came to participate in the primordial trial. At this time, when he suddenly saw such a mysterious river, he subconsciously thought it was the river of divine knowledge. However, Lin Yi shook his head. Although the river in front of him was indeed not an ordinary river, it was too far-fetched to say that it was the legendary river of divine knowledge. After all, whether it was the geographical location or various related descriptions, the river of divine knowledge was far from the one in front of him. There was actually such a clear river in such an unfathomable place. It looked exactly the same as a river on the surface. No matter how he thought about it, it was very strange, right? Fei Yangxing couldn't care less. He hurriedly rushed forward and carefully put the 2 bags of elixirs aside. Then he reached out to drink the river water. The river water of the river of divine knowledge could greatly enhance one's divine knowledge. This was a common saying in almost all the legendary versions of the river of divine knowledge. The most direct way to use it was to drink it into one's stomach. If it was cold or the others, Lin Yi would definitely stop them. No matter what, they had to figure out the details of this river first. However, since it was Fei Yangxing, there was nothing he could say. Anyway, they weren't particularly familiar with each other. Since Fei Yangxing was in high spirits, there was no need to disturb him. Moreover, it shouldn't be too dangerous to just drink some water. As a result, just as Fei Yangxing's hand reached into the water, before he could even scoop up the water, a hand covered with fine scales suddenly stretched out from the clear river water and grabbed him first. With a howl, Fei Yangxing was dragged down on the spot. He couldn't even struggle. This scene not only scared Fei Yangxing out of his wits, but even Lin Yi was taken aback. Because his divine knowledge was always sensing the surroundings, from the beginning to the end, he didn't notice that there was such a monster hiding in the river water. Even a powerful existence like the brain-eating insect had never been able to hide from Lin Yi's divine knowledge. After all, he had the spirit of the mysterious ascending stage. The river in front of him was only 10 steps away from Lin Yi. Such a monster was right under his nose and he didn't notice it at all. Just thinking about this made Lin Yi break out in cold sweat. Fortunately, it was Fei Yangxing. Otherwise, if something happened to any of Cold and the others, Lin Yi would definitely blame himself to death. After Fei Yangxing was dragged down, in just a blink of an eye, the river surface returned to its previous calmness. There was no clue to be seen with the naked eye. It was still so clear that the bottom could be seen. The monster just now could not be found, and there was no trace of Fei Yangxing either. It gave people the feeling that nothing had happened. You do have some skills, but is it appropriate to play tricks in front of me? Lin Yi's eyes narrowed into slits and he slowly walked toward the river. This river gave him a strange feeling from the beginning, and now he understood the source of the strangeness. It was the monster just now. Soon Lin Yi stopped at the place where Fei Yangxing had an accident just now. He looked quietly at the bottom of the river. Although he still couldn't see anything strange, his divine knowledge had already sensed some clues. The monster might be able to hide its traces perfectly, but it just dragged Fei Yangxing down with it. It was ridiculously difficult to hide Fei Yangxing in front of Lin Yi. Chapter 52-42. He didn't know what kind of ability the monster had, and he didn't know how strong it was. Of course, he couldn't act rashly at this time. As for Fei Yangxing, he could only let him suffer a little more. If he was lucky, Lin Yi might be able to save his life, but if the monster didn't show up, then he could only blame himself for being unlucky. After all, he couldn't let Lin Yi risk his life again and again to save an outsider like him, right? Fortunately, the heavens were on his side this time. The monster couldn't help but make another move when it saw that Lin Yi wasn't moving at all. A hand covered in scales shot out of the water abruptly, and the situation was exactly the same as before. This time its target was Lin Yi's ankle. Its intention was obvious. It wanted to drag Lin Yi into the river just like it did to Fei Yangxing. As long as he was in the water, it would be its world. Its movement was fast. Not only did it come out of the water abruptly, but it also didn't cause any ripples after it came out of the water. Its speed was also amazing. Even if an ordinary person wanted to guard against it, they wouldn't have the strength to do so. Unfortunately, its opponent was Lin Yi. Lin Yi had at least 10 ways to deal with its sneak attack, and this time, to ensure that nothing went wrong, he used the most unsolvable method. The hand had clearly grabbed Lin Yi's ankle, but the next moment, it suddenly grabbed nothing. Then Lin Yi appeared next to it, raised his hand, and a blue electric arc appeared. Taking advantage of the electric shock, he pulled the monster out of the water. He didn't know that he hadn't seen it, but he was shocked when he saw the monster's strange appearance. At first glance, he looked like a 4 or 5-year-old child, but his entire body was covered in dense black scales, and there was a medium-sized turtle shell on his back. There was a pit on the top of his head, and there was a lot of water in the pit. Anyone would be shocked by such an appearance. Kappa. This thought suddenly flashed in Lin Yi's mind. The image in front of him was exactly the same as the water monsters in folklore. Kappa was also called Water Tiger, and it was a water monster recorded in the Compendium of Materia Medica. However, he had always thought that it was just a legend. He didn't expect to meet a living one here today. You know me? The Kappa murmured, and at the same time, it stared at Lin Yi with great vigilance. Strictly speaking, it was an amphibious creature. The water was its world, and it could also move freely on land. Obviously, it was only in the water that it was confident. Now that it was suddenly grabbed by Lin Yi, it was extremely nervous. Looking at its posture, it didn't seem to want to attack Lin Yi, but to find a way to escape. It really is the legendary Kappa. This primordial trial has truly broadened my horizons. Lin Yi couldn't help but laugh when he heard this. First it was Gomong and now it was the Kappa. The ancient trial really lived up to its reputation. It really felt like returning to the ancient era. Human, what do you want? The Kappa still stared at Lin Yi with great vigilance. Nothing, I'm just a little curious. Lin Yi appeared very relaxed. In fact, there was really nothing to be nervous about. Before this Kappa was caught, he was really nervous for a while. After all, something that could hide from his divine sense was definitely not easy to deal with. However, there was no need to worry now because this guy was at most a Foundation establishment level spirit beast. It couldn't pose any real threat to Lin Yi. As for why it could hide from Lin Yi's divine sense, it was most likely the Kappa's innate ability. After all, this guy was an existence equivalent to a river god in some legends. Leave this place, leave the 100 Herb Garden, or you will regret it. The Kappa threatened. Unfortunately, its body was too small and it was dragged up by Lin Yi, so this threat was not much of a deterrent. So this is the 100 Herb Garden. Lin Yi nodded, looked it up and down and said, Then, are you the master of this place? I'm not, I'm just the gardener here. If my master finds out, you're dead. Hurry up and leave this place, human. The Kappa tried to drive him away again. Who is your master? Lin Yi ignored it and continued to ask with great interest. My master is. The Kappa suddenly paused. Its eyes blinked, and the water that had accumulated in the depression on its head suddenly soared into the sky. Then it poured down like rain. As soon as its body came into contact with the water, it immediately melted into nothingness. It looks quite simple and honest, but I didn't expect it to be so cunning. Lin Yi shook his head. His figure flashed and suddenly appeared in front of the right side. Without hesitation he used 1,000 frenzied kicks. Bang! Accompanied by a muffled sound, a thin figure suddenly appeared on the tip of Lin Yi's foot. Then, without any suspense, it flew out and fell heavily into a pile of spirit herbs dozens of meters away. How can you see me? The Kappa didn't care about its injury. Its face that was covered with thick scales squeezed out an extremely shocked expression. Disappearing into the water was the innate ability of the Kappa race. Even existences that were much stronger than them couldn't detect it. It didn't expect that it would fail in front of a human. Is it strange? Lin Yi asked it back. It was true that this guy's ability to merge into the water was very good. Just like when it hid in the river, it could be said to be flawless. Even Lin Yi's divine sense couldn't detect it. However, at least 50% of the reason was that the clear river water made people subconsciously become careless. Now that this factor was gone, even if Lin Yi couldn't completely lock onto its position, he could still find some clues and signs. This was enough for him. The Kappa was obviously choked and couldn't speak. Just as Lin Yi judged, it wasn't a powerful existence. If it was a little stronger in the river, it would be enough to deal with most spirit beasts and human cultivators at the Foundation establishment stage. However, once it was on the ground it was much weaker. In the end, the only trump card it could rely on was the innate ability of the Kappa race, disappearing into the water. But now Lin Yi had broken its innate ability, and it was stuck on the ground, unable to return to the river. Even if its psychological defense wasn't completely broken, it wasn't far from it. "Human, what do you want?" The Kappa looked at Lin Yi with a little panic. It pointed at the rare spirit herbs around them and said, "If you leave now, I can let you take some spirit herbs with you. Otherwise, if you alarm the master, you're dead." Chapter 52-43. These are all rare and precious elixirs. How can they be trash? Kappa quickly argued. It was the gardener of this place, and it could be said that every spiritual herb here was its blood and sweat. However, when it saw that Lin Yi was empty-handed, it immediately became speechless. It seemed that this human really didn't care about the spiritual herbs it had cultivated. After being stunned for a moment, Kappa suddenly said, "I can give you an even more precious spiritual herb, but you have to leave this place." "Let me see," Lin Yi said with interest. Hearing this, Kappa walked towards the river. When it saw Lin Yi stretch out his hand to stop it, it said, "The spiritual herb is in the river. Fine, if you dare to lie to me, I will blow up this river and destroy your 100-herb garden." Lin Yi warned. To be honest, he didn't trust this Kappa, but there was nothing to worry about. With Kappa's strength, it wouldn't matter even if he let the tiger return to the mountain. Kappa carefully walked around Lin Yi, and only when it returned to the river did it let out a sigh of relief. Looking at Lin Yi, who was still standing in the same place, its eyes rolled. If it wasn't for Lin Yi's warning just now, it might really hide and never come out again. But now it couldn't. If it really angered Lin Yi, blowing up the river and destroying the 100-herb garden would be a small matter. If it attracted its master and ruined its master's plan, then it would really be finished. Even if it had 10 lives, it wouldn't be enough to die. Sure enough, not long after, it reappeared on the river surface, holding a small bead in its hand. It was transparent and flawless like the clear river water, like a luminous pearl, exuding an intoxicating light. At first glance, it was obvious that it was not an ordinary item. "This water bead is for you, leave this place quickly, human." Kappa held the small bead and said, "Give it to me." Lin Yi's tone was very calm, but it was unquestionable. Kappa hesitated for a moment. Obviously, it didn't want to leave the river. Otherwise, it wouldn't feel safe, especially when it had to face a dangerous human cultivator like Lin Yi. However, it had no other choice. If it dared to say no, Lin Yi might do something to it. It couldn't bear the consequences. In the end, Kappa obediently walked over and handed the water bead to Lin Yi. Lin Yi was a little surprised when he held it in his hand. He thought that this water bead would be as hard as other beads, but he didn't expect it to be soft. It was really a water bead, but it was covered with a layer of transparent water film. "What's the use of this?" Lin Yi asked curiously. He had traveled all over the Heaven Step Island for several years and could be said to be very knowledgeable, but he had never seen this kind of water bead. However, he still had good eyesight. He could feel that this water bead was not simple. Just holding it in his hand made him feel refreshed. This water bead can clear the mind and calm the chi. Its main use is to heal the spiritual sense. If the spiritual sense is injured, it can recover in a very short time. Kappa explained in detail. Really? Lin Yi was happy when he heard this. No wonder he felt so comfortable holding it in his hand. It turned out that it was something specially used to heal the spiritual sense. Don't forget that he was now in the soul body. This thing was simply a great supplement for him. With this water droplet, Lin Yi felt even more confident. After all, a soul injury was a huge problem. If he really did get hurt, his self-healing abilities wouldn't be able to be of much use. Just like last time when he was injured, he basically relied on the starring charcoal to recover. After so many months of continuous use, the spiritual sense energy of the starring charcoal had been consumed to the point that not much was left. Once he suffered a serious injury again, it would be hard to say if he could recover smoothly. Maybe his soul would collapse. During this period, Lin Yi was worried about this. He needed to consume spiritual sense energy to maintain his soul body. Now, the starring charcoal was his only source of spiritual sense energy. Once it was completely consumed, it would not be long before he returned to Heaven Step Island. If it was before, it would not have mattered, but now that Cold and the others were in the dangerous primordial trial land, how could he go back with peace of mind? Fortunately, the remaining spiritual sense energy of the starring charcoal could still support him for a period of time. However, there was a very important premise, and that was not to be injured. Once he was injured, the spiritual sense energy needed to heal him would be no small matter. It was at least thousands of times more than what he needed to maintain his spiritual sense. The remaining spiritual sense energy of the starring charcoal could not withstand such a large consumption. Fortunately, Lin Yi had a lot of means to protect himself, and he had figured out the almost unsolvable means of semi-soul and primordial soul states. Putting aside everything else, it was not easy to seriously injure Lin Yi. Even an existence like the brain-eating insect could not do it. It was because of this that the starring charcoal could last until now. Otherwise, if he was injured every few days, his spiritual sense energy would have long been depleted. However, in this dangerous primordial trial land, accidents could happen all the time. Even Lin Yi could not guarantee that he would not be injured. If he was really injured, the remaining spiritual sense energy of the starring charcoal would not be enough. What should he do then? Now, the water droplet that Kappa took out gave him a glimmer of hope. Although it was not as versatile as the starring charcoal, it could provide spiritual sense energy at all times. But if it could really heal his spiritual sense as Kappa said, then it could solve a problem for him. At the very least, he would not have to worry about being injured. Of course it's true. Okay, I've already given you my best treasure. Human, you should leave quickly, Kappa urged. For it, taking out a water droplet was already a violation of the rules. If Lin Yi stayed here for too long and was discovered by its master, the consequences would be unimaginable. Lin Yi put away the water droplet and suddenly smiled. Did I say that I would leave here? You dare to act shamelessly. Despicable human. Kappa suddenly became anxious. It had tried every possible way to drive Lin Yi away, to the point that it did not hesitate to give up its water droplet. How could it have imagined that Lin Yi would have such a face? Humans had always been despicable and shameless. This saying was indeed true. Hey, you have to be responsible for what you say. When did I say that I would leave if you gave me a water droplet? Lin Yi looked at it and said, Whoa. Kappa tilted its head and thought for a long time, but it could not think of a way to refute. Because Lin Yi had never said anything like that from beginning to end, it was just its own wishful thinking. Chapter 52-44. How many more do you want? Kappa jumped up and even forgot about Lin Yi's overwhelming strength. He pointed at Lin Yi's head and scolded, You greedy, shameless human. This is a water droplet that can only be produced in 100 years. How many do you think there are? Lin Yi paused. He couldn't help but look at this childlike Kappa curiously. He did look a little weird with a little bit of slyness in him, but he was still a simple and honest guy. That impatient look of his was quite interesting. After a while, Kappa also reacted. It quickly retracted its hand and took a few steps back. Looking at Lin Yi, it stammered in fear, You should leave quickly. I don't have any more water droplets, not even one. Really? Lin Yi didn't believe it. He questioned, Since it can only be produced in 100 years, and no one has been here for at least 1,000 years, how can there only be one? Even if there aren't 10 or 20, there should be at least 8 or 10, right? This primordial trial ground only opened once every 1,000 years. In other words, the last time a human cultivator set foot in this place was at least 1,000 years ago. Moreover, this place was so strange and remote that ordinary people would not be able to discover it. Perhaps no one had come here for thousands of years. 8 or 10. Are you crazy? Kappa was about to go berserk again. However, facing the pressure from Lin Yi, it didn't dare to be too presumptuous. It could only suppress its anger and patiently explained, An entire river, under the protection of our Kappa clan, can only produce one water droplet after 100 years. After the water droplet is formed, it needs to be nourished continuously. Moreover, we have to spend even more energy to nourish the holy water droplet. Holy water droplet? Lin Yi's eyes lit up. Kappa suddenly realized that it had said something it shouldn't have. It quickly changed its words. What holy water droplet? I'm just talking about water droplets. Anyway, there is only one water droplet. Even if you kill me, I won't get another one. Really? Lin Yi stared at it with a faint smile. Kappa couldn't help but feel a little guilty. After thinking for a while, it said, If worst comes to worst, I will return that human to you. That human? Oh, you mean Fei Yangxing? Hearing this, Lin Yi was embarrassed. He had almost forgotten about this. After all, Kappa was not one of them, so he didn't really care about Fei Yangxing. Fortunately, Kappa was not a ferocious spirit beast. Otherwise, after such a long time, Fei Yangxing would have eaten up everything. Not long after, Fei Yangxing was dragged out by Kappa like a dead dog. It seemed that he didn't suffer any serious injuries. He just lost consciousness temporarily. Bubbles were still coming out of his mouth. Leave quickly. Otherwise I guarantee that you will die here, absolutely. Kappa almost begged. Of course, it didn't care about Lin Yi's life or death, but the problem was that if its master found out that a human cultivator had broken in, even it would be punished, and it might even be buried with Lin Yi. How about this? I won't make things difficult for you. Answer a few of my questions and I will leave after you understand them. Lin Yi said. Kappa hesitated for a moment. It knew that it wasn't a good idea to delay like this. However, it couldn't defeat Lin Yi, so it could only bite the bullet and said, "Okay, you said it yourself. You can't go back on your words." "Okay, how many Kappa are there here?" Lin Yi asked. This wasn't what he really cared about, he was just curious. "Just me," Kappa answered straightforwardly. "You are the only one in your Kappa clan?" Lin Yi was stunned. He thought that since it was a clan, there should be as many Kappa as the ancient Gomang clan. There should at least be an ancient Kappa king, but he didn't expect that there was only one Kappa. There used to be a lot of them, but a big accident happened 100 years ago. Everyone was killed by my master. I was the only one left to take care of the herb garden. Kappa said with a hint of sadness. What kind of existence is your master? Don't you hate him? Lin Yi asked casually. According to what Kappa said, it should be an irreconcilable enmity. Why would it continue to work for that master? Kappa was silent for a moment, then said, I can't tell you. Okay, then I will ask something else. Lin Yi didn't insist. He changed the topic and asked, is there anything special about this river? Is it the legendary river of divine knowledge? River of divine knowledge? How can it be the river of divine knowledge? Kappa looked at Lin Yi as if he was an idiot. He curled his lips and said, the river of divine knowledge is the largest river in the world. It is more than 100 zhang wide. How wide is this river of mine? There is nothing special about this river. It is only because it is guarded by our Kappa clan that it becomes different. This answer wasn't surprising. Lin Yi didn't think it was the river of divine knowledge at all. He continued to ask, one last question. Tell me about the holy water bead. This? Kappa hesitated for a moment. He hated himself for spilling the beans. Judging from this human's unforgiving behavior, he wouldn't leave until he figured out what was going on. In the end, Kappa could only brace himself and explain, the holy water bead is the most sacred object of our Kappa clan. It is said that it is the first generation of water beads. After being nourished by our ancestors for countless years, its function has far exceeded the scope of ordinary water beads. It is also because of the holy water bead that we were valued by our master. However, 100 years ago when we were collectively raising the holy water bead, an accident happened. A crack appeared on the holy water bead. In a rage, our master killed everyone. Oh, so that's how it is. It was only then that Lin Yi realized what was going on. This Kappa clan was really quite pitiful. Not only was their holy item stolen, the entire clan was forced to be slaves, and the slightest problem with their holy item almost wiped out the entire clan. There really wasn't anyone else who could live such a tragic life. I have said what I should and shouldn't say. You can leave now, right? Kappa looked at Lin Yi eagerly. He was afraid that Lin Yi would go back on his words again. If that happened, he would really be at his wit's end. All right, if that's the case, then tell me how to leave this place. Lin Yi nodded without hesitation. Chapter 52-45. More importantly, Lin Yi's top priority right now was to meet up with Cold and the others. He didn't dare to waste too much time here. Okay, come with me. Kappa was overjoyed. As long as Lin Yi was willing to leave this place as soon as possible, it didn't mind sending Lin Yi and Cold along the way. However, at this moment, a buzzing sound suddenly came from afar. Although he couldn't see the appearance of the other party clearly due to the distance, Lin Yi's divine sense had already locked on the position and shape of the other party. It was a giant poisonous bee the size of an adult. Patrol bee. Why is it here? Kappa froze. Lin Yi, on the other hand, didn't react at all. Kappa, on the other hand, was nervous to the point where he didn't know what to do. Are you afraid? Lin Yi glanced at it. Kappa was so nervous that it stuttered, If it finds out, you're dead. I'm dead too, but this guy doesn't look strong? Lin Yi was a little surprised. The patrol bee looked scary and it didn't look easy to mess with. However, it was just a spirit beast at the Foundation establishment stage. It was a piece of cake for Lin Yi to deal with it. It's not strong? Kappa wanted to retort subconsciously, since none of the patrol bees were easy to mess with. But after thinking about Lin Yi's performance just now, a mere patrol bee didn't seem to be a threat to the human at all. For the sake of the water droplet you gave me, I can get rid of it for you without anyone knowing, Lin Yi suggested. To be honest, he didn't have any bad feelings for this Kappa. On the contrary, he felt that this guy was actually not bad. He would help it if he could. Impossible. Kappa shook its head quickly. What's impossible? Didn't you say that we're dead if it finds us? Don't tell me you want to help it deal with me? Lin Yi asked in surprise. That's not what I mean. What I mean is that no matter how strong you are, you can't eliminate a single patrol bee without being noticed. Because they share the same brain, once one patrol bee is in trouble, all the other patrol bees will notice it immediately. So no matter what, as long as it discovers your existence, Master and the other patrol bees will know, Kappa said with a bitter face. Common brain mechanism? That would be troublesome. Lin Yi couldn't help but frown. The existence of such a mechanism was indeed a bit difficult to solve. Even if he could kill the patrol bee in a second, it would be useless. As long as he was discovered by the patrol bee, the situation would be out of control. In this way, the only option left for Lin Yi was to escape. If he was alone, it wouldn't matter. Unless he was willing, no matter how many patrol bees there were, they wouldn't be able to detect him. However, the problem was that Fei Yangxing was lying unconscious on the ground. The patrol bee's speed wasn't slow, and bees had always had good perception. Lin Yi wasn't confident that he could escape with such a burden. While they were talking, the patrol bee had already rushed in their direction. Its purpose was very clear. Even Lin Yi was a little nervous. Could it have already discovered him? Kappa was far more panicked than Lin Yi. In a hurry, he dragged Fei Yangxing on the ground and jumped into the river. At the same time, he said to Lin Yi, "You come in too. I'll use invisible underwater to cover you. It shouldn't be able to find you." Lin Yi was stunned for a moment. In fact, he didn't need to jump into the river, but in order to experience the Kappa's innate ability, he still followed. After Kappa brought Lin Yi and Fei Yangxing into the water, Lin Yi soon felt a faint layer of water covering his body. It didn't feel heavy at first, but when his body was completely covered by this layer of water, a magical scene happened. Lin Yi found that his primordial spirit had become transparent like the river. At first glance, there was almost no trace of it. It didn't take long for Lin Yi to figure out the theory behind it. It was a very advanced camouflage. In truth, many creatures in the natural world had camouflage, but creatures like the Kappa's camouflage were extremely rare. Of course, invisible underwater was definitely not a simple camouflage. Otherwise, it could at most confuse the naked eye, but it couldn't confuse the perception of divine sense. The real deceiving divine sense was this layer of water. Because of this layer of water covering his body, in the perception of divine sense, Lin Yi's whole body became the same as the river. Lin Yi couldn't help but secretly praise it. No wonder it was the innate ability of the Kappa family. Invisible underwater was really brilliant. It didn't take long for the patrol bee to appear above the river. At the same time, it sent a strange and sharp divine sense transmission. "Kappa, come out." Kappa's heart suddenly skipped a beat, but he didn't dare to act rashly. He could only use invisible underwater to carefully hide the figures of Lin Yi and Fei Yangxing. At the same time, he slowly emerged from the river. "Kappa, Master is summoning you." The patrol bee continued to use divine sense transmission. Hearing this, Kappa was slightly relieved. It seemed that the other party hadn't discovered Lin Yi and Fei Yangxing yet, so he said, "But I have to stay to guard the herb garden. This is Master's order." "You go, I will guard the herb garden. This is Master's new order," the patrol bee said stiffly. Kappa was suddenly in a dilemma. It didn't matter to him, but if he left, he wouldn't be able to use invisible underwater to hide Lin Yi and Fei Yangxing anymore. If he left, he would definitely be exposed and all his efforts would be in vain. "What are you waiting for?" "Master is waiting," the patrolling bee urged. "Brother patrol bee, can you tell me why Master summoned me?" Kappa asked eagerly. "Master wants to let those distinguished guests see the holy water bead with their own eyes. He needs you to temporarily cover that crack. That's why he summoned you," the patrol bee answered honestly. "Oh," Kappa nodded. "What are you waiting for?" the patrol bee urged again. According to its master's ruthless style, if Kappa didn't arrive soon, then it would be its turn to run out of luck. Kappa wanted to go, but he didn't dare to go just like that. After thinking for a while, he finally had an idea and said, "That? I just heard a big noise in front. Maybe the explosive flame fruit exploded or maybe something broke in." For safety's sake, it's better to go and confirm it. You're so long-winded. I'll do it. You go quickly. If Master gets impatient, you'll be in trouble. The patrol bee said and quickly left. Chapter 5246. However, he still didn't dare to deactivate invisible entry. The patrol bee's perception and alertness were top-notch. Even if he could lure them away, it wouldn't be that easy to fool them. Can't we go up? Linny asked. No, the only exit here is the stairway. If you go up, you will definitely be noticed by the patrol bee. I can only take you through the waterway, Kappa said. Unknowingly, it and Linny had become locusts on the same rope. Instead, it had become their accomplice. Linny didn't object. After all, he had nothing to be afraid of. Even if they were exposed, he had enough power to protect himself. As for what would happen to the unconscious Fei Yangxing, he could only leave it to fate. Kappa's speed in the water was extremely fast. Using invisible entry, it brought Lin Yi and Fei Yangxing downstream. In just a few moments they had reached the end of the river. In front of them was a huge gate. However, the gate wasn't completely closed. When Kappa approached it, a small opening suddenly appeared in the middle, just enough for one person to pass through. Behind the gate is the stairway. You can go out by climbing the stairway. Kappa explained, then took the lead and went through the gate. Lin Yi also pushed Fei Yangxing into the gate, then followed closely behind. As soon as the two passed through the gate, they were pulled out of the water by Kappa. In front of them was a huge and empty tree hole. They couldn't see the top at first glance. They only knew that the tree was very tall. There were spiral stairs on the inner wall. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that it was a stairway to heaven. Hurry up, the stairway is the outside world, Kappa urged. It then walked towards the water curtain cave in front of them. Hey, what's behind this water curtain cave? Why is it so noisy? Linny asked curiously. He vaguely heard that it was very noisy in front of them. It felt like a lot of people were having a party. Behind us is the inner garden. Today is our master's wedding. Many guests have been invited. Of course it's very lively. Why do you care so much? Hurry up, or you won't be able to leave if someone finds out. Kappa urged. Wedding? You guys are into this too? Hearing that, Linny smiled, but he didn't intend to explore further. He immediately dragged the unconscious Fei Yangxing up the celestial stairway. No matter what, he couldn't waste any more time in this place. Kappa finally let out a sigh of relief, thinking that it had finally sent away these two human gods of plague. However, before it could walk out of the water curtain cave, Lin Yi suddenly came back with Fei Yangxing in a hurry. You won't go back on your word again, right? Kappa was startled and hurriedly begged. I really don't have any more water droplets with me. The holy water droplets are in Master's hands. Don't even think about getting them unless you want to die. I beg you, leave quickly. No, I can't leave. Lin Yi smiled bitterly and shook his head. Why can't we leave? The celestial stairway is right here. You just have to climb up and you'll be out. Don't tell me you can't even climb up? Kappa couldn't help but become anxious. It thought that Lin Yi was determined to continue blackmailing it. Humans had always had a bad reputation. Despicable, shameless, and insatiable were all adjectives tailored to describe humans. I can climb up, but I've encountered an old opponent. I have to hide for the time being. Lin Yi smiled bitterly. What old opponent? Kappa was full of disbelief. The brain-eating bug. Lin Yi said seriously. For safety's sake, he had just transformed into his Yuan Shin state and floated up to explore for a while. As a result, he took a deep breath. The brain-eating bug, his old opponent, was actually swooping down from above. It really shocked him. Fortunately, he acted cautiously. Otherwise, he would really be in big trouble this time. There was no doubt that for the current Lin Yi, the brain-eating bug was a powerful and almost invincible opponent. With his current means, he could not do anything to the brain-eating bug. If he fought it, he would only suffer. Admittedly, last time he successfully escaped the brain-eating bug's pursuit using his Yuan Shin state, but the premise was that they were far enough apart. Once they were close, the brain-eating bug's perception was very likely to detect his Yuan Shin state. At that time, he would be in big trouble. Lin Yi did not dare to take such a risk. The only thing he could do now was to hide and get as far away from the brain-eating bug as possible. Brain-eating bug? You mean Sir Envoy? That's an existence on the same level as our master. Kappa was also shocked. It had obviously heard of the brain-eating bug. Although it did not believe it at first, it made sense after thinking about it carefully. Although the brain-eating bug and its master had always been at odds, they were both the left and right hands of that Sir. Since it was its master's wedding day, it was not surprising that the brain-eating bug came to support them. So, hurry up and take us back to hide. This time it was Lin Yi's turn to urge it. Although he found that the brain-eating bug's position was still relatively high, with the brain-eating bug's speed, even if it was just descending slowly, there was not much time for him to dawdle. How do we go back? If we come in from the outside, we just need to open the small gate and no one will care. But if we want to go out from here, we must open the big gate. The movement will definitely alert everyone in the inner garden. We won't even know how we died. Kappa said anxiously. Then, Lin Yi thought for a moment before making a decision. How about this? We'll go into the inner garden, and you think of a way to hide this bastard someplace. As long as no one finds out, I don't have to worry about it. I have my ways. You're crazy. Kappa was shocked when it heard this. Not only was its master inside, but all the elixirs here were also gathered. At the same time, there were VIPs coming from all directions. How could it hide a living person like Fei Yangxing? However, Lin Yi did not have time to waste with it because the brain-eating bug had entered the range of his divine sense. If they did not leave, they would be discovered. He immediately said, "No matter what, you find a way, that's it." As soon as his voice fell, Lin Yi disappeared, leaving behind a panicked Kappa and an unconscious Fei Yangxing. Shameless human. In the end, Kappa was forced to bite the bullet and bring Fei Yangxing with him. The moment they passed through the water curtain cave, it used its innate ability to enter the water to conceal itself. Fortunately, all the guests' attention was on its master, so no one noticed it. Finally, it managed to sneak in without any danger. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.